Welcome to Mr. Night Spook. Tonight, in 5 true night shift horror stories, we step into the world after closing time, when the rest of the world sleeps, and only the hum of vending machines, buzzing fluorescents, and distant footsteps keep you company. These are the real accounts of gas station clerks, hospital janitors, warehouse workers, and graveyard caretakers who witnessed what should not exist. Faces on security monitors that don't match any employee, doors that open for invisible customers, and clocks that tick past the limits of time itself. This is a new channel, and my goal this month is to reach 1,000 subscribers. Nearly 90% of viewers watch and leave without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Hit that button and stay with us through the long, dark hours. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it in your corner of the night? And if you've ever worked the night shift, share what it felt like when the world went quiet and something else started listening. Dim the lights. Lock the doors. Let the machines hum and the silence breathe. Because the night shift never really ends. I started working nights at the Lone Star Quick Mart because I figured boredom was easier to live with than people. Most nights it's just me, the cicadas, and the low hum of things that never really turn off. The soda coolers rattling like they're coming down with a fever. The soft fizz inside the coffee pot even when it's empty. The neon Bud Light sign in the window batting its sick blue eye until dawn. I come in at 10:45 p.m. Take the handwritten log from the day manager, count the drawer, flip the open sign if the afternoon kid is forgotten, and step behind a counter that smells like old peppermint and degreaser. I sweep up sunflower seed shells. I reface the beef jerky. Sometimes I talk to the lottery machine when it jams. It answers in a way that makes you think you're the one who's broken. There's a rhythm to the highway at that hour. Truckers rumble by with trailers that glow like ribs, a beat-up Honda or two, an occasional sheriff cruising by slow enough to make it feel personal. The gas canopy lights throw a pale island into the pasture darkness, and moths throw themselves at it like they're trying to break into heaven. If you stand by the glass doors long enough, your reflection looks honest in the fluorescent light. It makes everyone look like they're trying. I liked that part. I liked how the glass didn't care if you were any good at being a person. The night I'm going to tell you about wasn't the first strange one. The first strange one was weeks earlier, though I didn't have the sense to label it then. It's never the miracles or the monsters in my experience. It's the little offbeats that start to make a second song under the first. A customer paying with $2 bills who says your name without looking at your tag. A stalled song on the radio that doesn't skip so much as it forgets where it was going. The door chime that rings twice even though nobody is there. When the little chorus gets loud enough, you finally notice you're dancing to something you don't remember putting on. I always bring a thermos. You can't trust the store coffee past midnight. It sits on the hot plate until it turns the color of pennies found in a gutter, and then it starts to taste like old paper and rain. I settle in with the thermos, the logbook, the register drawer counted out to 120 in singles, coin tubes stacked like dull silver bullets. I do the same thing I always do, and the store, grateful, behaves like it always does until it doesn't. At 11:13 p.m., a guy walked in wearing a camo cap with a sweat-stained bill and a shirt that said Mac in letters cracked like dry paint. I'd never seen him before, but that doesn't mean much. Highway nights bring strangers. He headed for the cigarettes with that determined blotter stamp walk small-town men have, boots squeaking out a little dry cough on our tile floor. He put both palms on the counter the way old guys do when they're about to tell you a story you didn't ask for. "Pack of Reds," he said, and then he smiled in a way that made his molars look like chipped china. "Hey, is Travis working tonight or just you?" I rang up the Marlboro Reds without looking at him. It's a habit. You keep your eyes on the register, so the price of the world doesn't change. "Just me," I said. "No Travis on nights." The man chuckled and tapped twice on the counter with 2 thick fingers, a gesture that felt practiced between us even though I'd never seen him. "Tell him Hank said he still owes me a coffee," he said. "And a scratch-off." "Lucky sevens, I don't know a Hank," I said. "I don't know a Travis either. I mean, I know a Travis in general, but not a Travis here." His smile didn't sag or shift. It just stayed like a decal stuck on a truck window. "Sure you do," he said. I was his ride home that night. Would have been yours too if you'd have made it to the door. We both listened to the hum of the coolers for a second. The cigarette rack made a faint glassy tick like one of the boxes was settling in its slot. I told myself he was messing with me the way older men do when they spot someone who looks like he can be spooked. 876, I said, and the register drawer opened like a mouth. He paid with a 10 and a quarter in coins he slowly slid across the counter, like he wanted to watch each one scrape the laminate. While I gave him his change, he looked past me to the security monitor that hangs from a ceiling bracket by the office door. It shows 4 angles: the front doors, the aisle with the motor oil and wiper fluid, the coffee bar and roller grill, and the counter. He studied it the way you'd study a television in a bar when the sound is off and you don't care who wins. "Camera's looking clean tonight," he said. "Lot of empty space. Lot of nothing." "Guess so," I said and didn't look. There's an old superstition in night work. Don't go looking for things you don't want to find. He picked up his pack, nodded once like we'd finished a conversation I hadn't taken part in, and left with the door chime clattering in his wake like a dropped spoon. The gas canopy light smeared his truck in the glass. He drove off into the kind of dark the road can't seem to keep a hold on. I made a note in the log about cigarettes because that's what you do when something makes you feel dumb. The logbook is a place where little facts can get wrapped around your fear like gauze. At 11:25 p.m., the radio behind the counter went from classic rock to weather static without moving stations. The announcer's voice cut in clear enough to sound like someone standing in the aisle behind me. "Expect a low of," he said and stopped, and then the whispering scratch of air took over, soft as the inside of a seashell, a kind of ocean nobody wants to swim in. I was checking the roller grill, throwing out a hot dog that had turned the color of a winter sun, when the front door sighed and opened. The chime rang a cheerful little bright bing that sounded wrong in the lonely hour, like a child laughing in an empty church. A teenage girl came in wearing pajama pants with little lightning bolts on them, a black hoodie, no shoes. She left damp prints on the mat. It hadn't rained. Her hair hung in strings like she'd combed it with her fingers and then changed her mind halfway through. She kept her eyes on the floor as she wandered up one aisle and down another, dragging her palm along the metal shelf edges, a faint shock sound that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Can I help you find something?" I said. My voice sounded like it had been loaned to me. She didn't answer, just came to the counter and reached into the front pocket of her hoodie. She pulled out a wallet. It was black leather gone gray where it had been bent and handled, and I knew the shape of it the way you know your own ugly handwriting. There's a place a wallet forms to you, a little bow, a particular corner frayed by a particular habit. She set it down and my name looked up at me from the frosted plastic ID window, and there was a smear of something dark across the letters, like they were trying to hide. The wallet was mine. The letter R in my last name was missing most of its tail from where I'd picked it that cheap. Laminate with my thumbnail in long lines so I didn't have to think I found this outside, she said to the floor. I opened my mouth and for a second nothing came out. The name on the ID was mine, my address out on County Road 17. The picture where I look like I've just learned something I wished I hadn't. The kid's hand hovered over the wallet like she might take it back if I didn't move fast enough. Her nails were bitten to little pale moons. "Where?" I said finally. "In the parking lot," she said, but the way she said it made parking lot sound like a place in a story, a hard line you shouldn't cross, by the ice chest. "It was in the red." I thought someone dropped it. I slid the wallet off the counter with 2 fingers, slow like it might break. It was slick. I didn't want to look at my ID, not really, but I did. The date of birth and the expiration, the grainy face, the little hologram star nobody pays attention to, all of it exactly right and exactly wrong. My last name's tail was missing. The same missing tail. I could feel the hollow in my pocket where a wallet should have been, but the hollow felt like a memory of a pocket, and I realized I couldn't remember patting myself down when I clocked in. There's a sticky disorientation that comes when the world is only almost itself. "It's like being drunk without the fun part. You okay?" the girl asked and finally lifted her eyes. They were gray, the kind of gray that looks blue when you want it to. She flinched when she saw my face fully. Not a big flinch, more like what you do when a moth flies too close and you don't want to look silly. "Sorry," she added soft. You look like you haven't slept." "Thanks for bringing this in," I said. "What's your name?" "People call me Birdie," she said, and I could hear that she meant it as a defense against the real answer. "Okay, Birdie," I said. "You need anything else?" She looked at the candy rack and then shook her head. "No, I don't think he's coming in tonight," she said. "Who?" "The man from the pictures," she said, pointing at the wall where we keep our stupid framed Polaroids of customers who win $50 on a scratch-off. Her finger didn't point at any of those. It drifted, uncertain, then lowered. "Never mind," she said. "He always forgets." When she turned toward the door, I saw the bottoms of her feet were dark with something that wasn't exactly dirt. The chime gave its bright bing again, polite and hopeless. When she was gone, the store felt bigger. The aisles stretched out like they do in dreams where you're running, but the hallway keeps growing in front of you, each step falling on the same square of tile no matter how hard you try. I held my wallet. My fingers left clean streaks in the smear on the leather. The security monitor slid frames like it had oil in its blood. Out of habit or superstition or both, I finally looked up at it. The front doors, the motor oil aisle, the coffee bar, the counter, the register, the jar of penny candy, an empty patch of space where I should have been. Maybe you've done this too. You blink hard and then you laugh at yourself for blinking hard. Your brain, good dog that it is, produces the most rational thing it can in a hurry and slaps it on the moment like a band-aid. Glare, angles, dead pixel. Old system. The cameras are older than the big freeze that broke half the faucets in town. The counter camera has a blind spot. Some trick of light. I reached up and waved at the lens. The blank space didn't wave back. There was the drawer, popped half an inch from where I'd leaned against it. There was the thermos sweating a little ring. There was a space where a person should be and only wasn't because that person was me. I pressed my hand flat on the counter. I looked at the monitor. The counter on the monitor did not receive my hand. It remained the counter of a store that didn't feel like it needed people anymore. The neon outside flickered once, and in the reflection, I saw moths whirling like a held breath let go all at once. I don't scare easy, I promise you that. Something happens to a man when he's awake at hours God intended for coyotes and truckers. Your fear gets practical or it gets you. I checked the door lock, then checked the back door by the stockroom, then checked the bathroom as if some answer might be curled up by the mop bucket. I came back to the counter and stood where my body refused to be seen on the screen. I felt for my pulse the way I do when I start worrying about stupid things like a heart that's had too much bad coffee. It thudded along. My breath fogged the little smudge on the lottery machine screen. Whatever I was here enough to smudge glass. Just before midnight, the radio came back like it had excused itself to cry in the office. The DJ's voice, smooth as melty peanut butter, apologized for technical difficulties and spun up, "Runnin' down a dream." Tom Petty sounded like he was coming from a speaker underwater. I turned the volume down and the quiet got loud again. The man who came in at 12:08 a.m. had a badge tan and a haircut the Army would have been proud to claim, even if it hadn't been theirs. He wore a brown Sheriff's Department jacket older than I was, the kind with a zipper that sticks so you learn to live with it open. He didn't take off his aviators, which is a funny thing to wear at midnight inside a fluorescent box. He smelled like cold air and old vinyl. The scent of a patrol car that hasn't been truly cleaned since before the last election cycle. He put a six-pack of Dr. Pepper on the counter and a family-sized bag of pork rinds and a thing of chewing tobacco, and then looked past me at the monitor, as if he'd been told to expect it. "You all right, Travis?" he asked me, like we were in the middle of a check-in that happened every night. "I'm not Travis," I said. He made a small sound that could have been a laugh or could have been old air escaping old lungs. "Sure," he said. And then, like he was reading off a list he'd made before he came in, "You seen anything unusual?" "Define unusual," I said, which is the kind of dumb thing you say to make yourself feel clever when you're starting to feel like the world has set a trap with your name on it. His jaw did a slow chew, not on anything, just on the idea of chewing. "Door chime ringing when nobody's there," he said. "Headlights stopping just short of the pumps and then leaving, nobody getting out. Folks asking for people who aren't on the schedule. You seeing yourself on that TV?" He said it like saying it could take some of the scare out of it. "Who are you?" I said, because if we were going to pretend to be polite, it might help me to know the shape of the man I was pretending with. "Deputy Leon Mercer," he said, and tapped 2 fingers under the badge of his jacket like the card in a magic trick. At least that's the name they painted on my mailbox. He looked like the kind of man small towns grow in hard soil, decent enough to be fair, tired enough to miss things that needed noticing. He slid a few bills across the counter and didn't wait for me to tell him the total, like the act of paying was the point and not the amount. "Can I ask you something?" I said, and he nodded, slow as dusk. "You know a Travis?" He took off his sunglasses then, and his eyes were red like he'd been looking at something far away for too long. "Everybody knew Travis," he said. "Before, after. In the way small towns know someone when the worst thing that happened to him happened in front of everybody, and the rest of his life got eaten by that moment." He watched me watching him. His gaze flicked, unwilling or unable, to the monitor again. "You call if you see anything," he said, and slid a business card across the counter. The card had a crease through the middle like it had been folded and unfolded 100 times. My thumb brushed something gritty on it. "Sugar, salt, dust. You remember you can call," he added, even though I hadn't said I couldn't. "I can remember," I said, and heard myself lie. When he left, I put his card by the lottery machine under the little plastic tip jar that nobody tips in. His card looked wrong there, like a white tooth knocked out and left on a bar, clean and useless. I picked up my wallet again. It felt heavier now, the way memory can feel heavier when it finally sits down in your lap. I neither put it away nor opened it. The neon flickered twice in quick succession. The clock over the coffee station ticked like it was just pretending. Around 1, the wind kicked up enough to make the plastic firewood $7 sign out front slap its own hook. I stalked the beer cooler from the back, letting the cold settle into my forearms until the hairs stood up and I had to blow on my knuckles through a grin that nobody could see. When I came back to the counter, there was a man there I could have sworn I'd locked the doors against. He wore a white button-down with the sleeves rolled twice. His face was the color of old porcelain and just as smooth, like whatever expressions he'd once had been gently wiped away. He smiled with everything but his eyes. "Do you sell gas cans?" he asked, and then, "Travis, right? You always did the nights. Figured I'd catch you." I did not want to say my name again. I did not want to hear him say Travis again. I pointed toward the back, toward the shelf with the funnels and die-cast model trucks and the gallons of blue windshield washer fluid that always leak. "By the motor oil," I said. He moved graceful as a dance teacher, that glide that looks lazy until you realize every step is chosen. When he came back, he had a red plastic can that sloshed when he set it down. I hadn't heard the shelf creak, hadn't heard him take it. He set a 5 on the counter, and then another 5, and then another 5. Slow, smiling, watching my hands like he was waiting for me to get to a part he liked. "You want a receipt?" I asked because my mouth didn't know what else to do. "For what?" he said, and the way he said it made me feel like a child who'd missed a step on a familiar staircase. He leaned in just a little. His breath smelled like wintergreen and copper pennies. "Took you long enough to get back to nights," he said. "Thought maybe you'd wandered off. They always wander off when the tape stops playing." "What tape?" I said. He touched the counter with his fingertips, a gentle pat that made the laminate click. "You know," he said, "the one that says this is the same night, the same hum, the same coffee smell, the same man behind the register who isn't there." He turned his head toward the monitor, and for the first time something like interest touched his eyes. "Sometimes I see you," he said, calm as weather. "Sometimes I don't. When I don't, it's the closest thing to peace a place like this can manage." I could have asked him what he meant. I could have told him to leave, or maybe I could have stepped around the counter and proven to myself that I made a sound on the tile, that my shoes squeaked like anyone else's. Instead, I said, "We close the restroom at 1. He laughed, delighted, as if I had told a joke he'd hoped I'd tell. "Of course you do," he said. "Of course you do, Travis." He took the gas can like a prize he'd won and walked out with that dance teacher glide. He didn't set off the door chime. The doors opened anyway. I took the deputy's card and turned it over. On the back, in a hand that sprawled like a tired man across the page, there was a number that had been written on top of another number. The first number was scratched out hard enough to groove the paper. The second number ended with 911, which made me wonder if he'd written the first wrong or just decided to give me training wheels. I looked at the phone on the wall. "It's the color of old teeth. You have to dial 9 to get out on a line. I cannot explain to you why I did not pick it up then. Some part of me believed calling would be like naming a thing you don't want to keep. You want to keep your fear unnamed until you have something to trade it for." At 2:20, the lights flickered once and then came back brighter, which is an unnatural order for things to go. The hum of the coolers shifted half a pitch down. A tired old man clearing his throat to tell you something you won't like. The world got a degree colder, or I did. I stood very still and tried to feel the small noises. The tick of the clock, the fizz of the neon, the faraway yip of a coyote picking a fight with the moon. For a heartbeat, I thought I heard tires on gravel. That soft grinding like teeth talking in their sleep. The motor didn't follow. The door didn't open. But I had the sense of a car settling in the lot. Weight leaning off a spring. A presence at the pumps that wasn't interested in gas. Sometimes memory comes on like weather. You feel it a mile off. The sky in the back of your head goes bruise purple, and you know what storm is rolling in even before you can say its name. I thought about Travis then, and I don't know why that felt like something I could afford to do. Travis worked nights before me, I'd been told. People say things at the register like they're offering you little coins of truth. Back when Travis was here, they say, and they put their change in their pocket, satisfied they've bought their memory. I had a picture of Travis in my mind, and the picture felt stolen. The picture was of a man who looked like me, the way a song on the radio sounds like the one you really wanted to hear. He had a habit of tapping the counter twice when he thought he was being funny. He kept a roll of butterscotch discs under the lotto display for kids who came in with their moms past bedtime. When he was bored, he realigned the gum so each package made a perfect little row like houses in a postcard town. I had a memory of that. I had no right to have it. I opened my wallet. The smear had dried, dark brown now, like a memory after air. The cash slot was empty, which felt correct in a way that made my stomach ache. The little side sleeve where I keep the gas receipt I always promise I'll put in my glove box held a sliver of paper. I pulled it out. The date was 5 summers ago. Same date as tonight, except then it fell on a Tuesday. Same timestamp, 2:41 a.m. The receipt was for $20 of regular unleaded Pump 3 final sale. The cashier's ID at the top read Travis. The name printed like the register had said it out loud. In the blank where the station prints the address in tiny letters so nobody sues the wrong corporation, the numbers and street had been rubbed away until only State HWY 76 could be made out beneath the filed strip of paper. I put the receipt down slowly, like it might detonate if I offended it. The radio hiccuped, and then a female voice said the word fatal, with the same casual taste she used for Friday. I turned it off. The silence thudded like a heartbeat under a floor you're not supposed to lift. At 2:43, the door chime rang. I didn't see the doors move. The register drawer slid open by itself, an inch, then settled. I could smell, faint and far as rain you're not sure is real, the black stink of old oil and pennies and something like cold iron. The security monitor threw a shiver across the coffee bar frame, a strip of fuzz like a sweater snag. I looked up in time to see the counter camera, my absent place fuzz into gray and then clear. For a breath, there was someone there in that frame. Not me and not me. He leaned on the counter with both hands, and I recognized the knuckles, the short scar beneath the right thumb, the untidy cuff of a shirt that had seen too many nights. He looked up at the lens like he'd heard something he'd been waiting to hear a long time. For a heartbeat, he saw me. For a heartbeat, I saw him. The picture tore itself back to nothing like a paper screen pulled away in a magic trick. I stepped out from behind the counter. The floor caught my weight. The tile was cold through the rubber of my shoes. I made the little squeak sound that says a person is here and wants attention. The aisles were straight and lonely. The fluorescent tubes buzzed. A fly came on shift, banging itself against the freezer doors like it thought it might make a door learn mercy. I walked to the front doors and looked out. The canopy lights made the gas pumps into small islands. Pump 3 had a torn plastic bag over its handle, and a handwritten sign that said out of order, though I knew I had not put that sign there, and the day manager hadn't mentioned it in the book. Beyond the light pasture, beyond the pasture, a little stand of scrub that pretends to be a grove if the moon is drunk enough. The gravel near the pumps looked recently disturbed. But that's gravel. It remembers everything and nothing. Back at the counter, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The kind of ghost buzz that convinces you you're not alone. I don't get service inside the store. The building holds its breath and refuses to let the towers talk to me. I took it out anyway. No service. No notifications. No missed calls. The screen lit my face in a way that made my reflection on the doors look like a stranger skulking around outside. I thumbed my camera app on without thinking why. On the phone screen, in the pocket mirror world the camera makes, the counter was there, and the cheap pen with the gas station chain's logo on it was there, and the used-to-be white note that says "Don't sell cigs to minors" was there, and I was not. The phone showed the same thing the security monitor showed. It wasn't a blind spot. It was a fact of the room I'd chosen not to take personally until now. I lifted my hand in front of my face, foolish, and waved. The background waved. At 3, 2 teenage boys came in high on something I hope was just adrenaline. They had that raw grin you wear when you've snuck out and the world hasn't noticed your absence yet. One went straight for the Slurpee machine, even though we don't call it that, since that's the other chain and names matter to people who own things. The other came to the counter and asked for Marlboro Lights, like me refusing him would be a rejection of his manhood. He leaned in to argue the point, then froze with his mouth half open as if he'd gotten a whiff of a bad idea and it sobered him. His eyes slid to the monitor. "Dude," he said to his friend, "come look at this." I almost told him not to. There's dignity in not being part of your own revelation. The second boy came over, licking cherry ice off his thumb. He wasn't wearing shoes either. His feet were black with the kind of country night that even porch lights can't wash away. He laughed, just once, then pressed his fist to his mouth like he'd forgotten how to laugh quiet. "Bro, no way," he said. "No way." He pointed his phone at the counter and then his face rearranged itself. He lowered his phone like a gun he no longer believed in. For a second, he made eye contact with me like a reflex. A human reflex. Something like sadness passed over his features, quick as a cloud. "I'm sorry, man," he said, almost too soft to hear. "I'm sorry I was a dick." "It's okay," I said, but he was already backing away, pulling his friend by the sleeve toward the door, leaving the Slurpee cup sweating a bright ring like a wound. The chime banged out a frantic little stuttered song as if nervous on their behalf. The apology hung in the air like incense, making the place feel like a church nobody goes to anymore. I stood there for a long time, or a short time, it's hard to tell which when your sense of hours is a dog you can't quite call to heel. I poured out the coffee that had become the color of an old bruise. I wiped the counter. The cloth left a streak that didn't show up on the monitor. I put the cloth in the mop sink and watched water run rusty for a moment. When I came back out, a man was standing at the end of aisle 2, the one with the jerky and the motor oil and the glossy car magazines that try too hard. I knew him without knowing him. Not the way I'd known Travis, which was a knowledge like a hand-me-down sweater, but in the way you know a fear you've managed to keep just at the edge of vision. He wore a hoodie with no logo, the kind of nothing that tries to make itself something later. The hood was up even though the air conditioning had kicked off to take a breath. His jeans were dark and wrong, like he'd been nowhere and everywhere. He had one hand in his pocket. The other hung empty and not. He didn't move. He didn't look at me. He looked at the security monitor, and then, like he'd heard his cue, he looked straight at me. "You're late," he said. I didn't answer because my mouth had become a place where words went to be quiet. He stepped toward the counter in a way that made me want the counter to be higher. You learn working nights that most people's violence is a show they put on for themselves. This didn't feel like a show. This felt like remembering the lines because someone else forgot to. "You're late," he said again, and this time it wasn't to me so much as it was to the room, to the tape wherever it was hidden. "You were supposed to be here. You were supposed to be where you're supposed to be." "I am here," I said. "I'm at the register." He tilted his head, bird-like. He smiled with the wrong half of his mouth. "Then why don't you ring me up, Travis?" There are moments when your name feels like yours in a way that hurts, like a tooth you've been tonguing finally gives. I thought of the receipt in my wallet. I thought of the deputy's card with the crease through the middle. I thought of the teenager named Birdie with bare feet and stormy eyes. I put my hands on the counter. They made the sound hands make on laminate. The monitor showed the jar of penny candy and the "Don't sell cigs to minors" sign and nothing else. "What do you need?" I said. He put something on the counter. For a second, my mind couldn't decide what shape it was. My brain offered me a Snickers bar, a pack of gum, a knife, a gun, a wallet, a hand, a heart. It settled on a wallet, red-brown, slick, not mine. He opened it and took out 3 crumpled ones and a receipt that had bled a little rain through its ink. He looked at me the way men look at other men when they're deciding if they hate you or just the part of you that looks like them. "Gas," he said. "Pump 3. He placed the bills down one at a time, a slow little drum beat. Each one stuck a little to his fingers. "And whatever is in the till." There is a script in a store like mine for that sentence. The script says, "Do not play hero." The script says, "Open the drawer." The script says give him what he wants and then press the silent alarm if you still have hands to press it with. The script says remember details if you can do it without looking like you are. Tattoos, scars, the way someone stands when they're getting away with it. I've always been good at scripts. I pushed the no sale button and the drawer popped like it had been waiting. He didn't flinch. He did not take his hand out of his pocket. He looked around the store in that careful way predators look around, not to admire but to inventory. His gaze slid across the office door, the camera monitor, the kid's Slurpee ring on the counter, the place where the floor tile cracked like an old knuckle. "You don't look like the picture," he said, conversational as a neighbor at the fence. "What picture?" I asked, because if I didn't keep the words moving, they'd stop and I'd realize how quiet the world had gotten. "The one they put on the news," he said. "Your mom crying like she was the first mom to cry." He shook his head almost kindly and tapped the counter twice with his knuckles. "Pump 3, he said again. "And the drawer." I counted bills. I slid them across. The action felt like I was a magician showing my hands were empty. He took the money without looking at it. He did not put it away. He held it like he thought it might turn into something else if he waited. "You called the law last time," he said. He didn't get here in time. He tilted his head the other way now, balancing the first tilt. "Maybe don't try that this time." "I didn't," I said, and it sounded like a confession. "I know," he said, almost soft. "I know you don't get to change the part you think you can change." He stepped back then. "It wasn't like you'd imagine the way it would be in a movie." He didn't run. He didn't wave the weapon he may or may not have had. He just turned as if he'd remembered something he'd left on a stove somewhere else. Over his shoulder, he said without heat, "You should have let Travis go home early." And that was when I understood something like a light going off in another room. The girl with the bare feet. The man with the gas can. The deputy with the folded card. The receipt with the date 5 summers ago. The empty space on the screen whenever I stood where the living stood. I couldn't have told you before that second that there are kinds of remembering that work in reverse. That you can remember a thing you're still doing. But I did. Somewhere in the part of me not allowed to appear on cameras. I leaned on a counter in a store on a highway in Texas and felt the night I died come sliding back onto its track. My heart did the thing a rabbit's heart must do when the hounds are close. The hum of the coolers grew teeth. The neon sign beat its single blue eyelid faster, like it was scared now too. I took a step toward the office door and the store gave one of those old building groans like it had shifted its shoulders to make the aisles longer. The man in the hoodie was at the doors now. He didn't push them. They opened for him like they were glad to see him go. The chime sang its cheerful wrong song. The canopy light painted him in off-white that made him look like a born-again ghost. He stepped outside into a darkness that had been waiting for him in particular. I could have taken that moment to run to the back and out into the night. I could have followed him at a distance like in the memory the deputy's card wanted me to have. I could have dialed the number that was scratched out, and then the number that replaced it. I could have done anything a man does when he believes doing something matters. Instead, I stepped back behind the counter and put my hands exactly where the other me had put them all those other nights, and stood in the space the cameras refused to acknowledge. And I waited. Maybe that sounds weak to you. Maybe it sounds like surrender. But I want to explain this part because it matters. The thing about loops is not that they are circles. It's that they're roads with no shoulder. You can't pull over. You're either on them, or you aren't a thing that can move. And once I understood that, once I felt the weight of my own absence on the screen, the kindness of the emptiness in the camera that was sparing somebody from seeing what came next, there was a relief in it. I no longer had to be clever. I had to be present, even if present was a word that only meant something to me. Headlights drew 3 long lines across the floor. They came and went like an inhale. Gravel spoke. The pump light flickered like it wanted to tell a joke and forgot the punchline. Somewhere a coyote stopped talking to the moon. In the monitors, nothing moved at the counter. In my bones, everything did. He came back in, quick-footed now, the money gone, his hand still in his pocket, his face a mirror with the wrong things written on it. He said my name again, not mine, the other one, like a benediction and a curse. He reached across the counter with that empty and not empty hand, and time did the slow syrupy thing it does when it wants to show you everything and spare you nothing. I felt the pressure of the world narrow to a point with the weight of a man's need behind it. I heard the hum of the coolers break like a voice cracking. I saw in the door glass the off-white canopy light turn my reflection into something the store had decided it didn't have to love. There was pain, yes, but the surprise was bigger than the pain. The surprise was that the surprise was gone as soon as it came, and what was left was not absence but a kind of bass note, a tone the world had been holding all along. After the first shock, there is a second shock that you won't get to go home and take your shoes off. That the note you've been humming is the one the room was tuned to. There are details you don't need. There are kinds of blood you don't have to collect in words. The camera collected none of it. The monitor comforted itself with an empty counter. The neon blinked and blunked like it had been told a bad joke in a language it halfway understood. The door chime sang and then went quiet. Time, kind or cruel, I don't know which, took the rest and put it where I couldn't see it anymore. When I could think a thought that held still long enough to touch, I was standing where I always stand, hands on the counter, the drawer closed, the logbook open to a page with my handwriting on it. The clock over the coffee station said 11:02 p.m. The hum of the coolers was the safe hum again, the one you can ignore if you want to. The neon blinked. The night was itself. A moth bumped the glass like a drunk asking to be let in. If I'd let myself believe in mercy, I could have believed in it then. But the receipt in my wallet had not changed its date. The card by the lottery machine still had a crease like a broken spine. The satisfaction you get from picking stale coffee grounds off the burner with a fingernail didn't come back. I did my shift. I counted. I restocked. I shut the restroom at 1. The man in the old sheriff jacket came in again. Or I remembered him from before. And he did not take off his sunglasses this time. And he did not leave a card. And he asked me if I'd seen anything unusual, and I said no. Because I had learned in the span of a breath how not to be a burden. The teenager named Birdie came barefoot and sad and returned a wallet to me. And the smear on it was the same color it would become when it dried. And she apologized to the floor for seeing me. The boys came and did not. The man with the dance teacher glide bought the gas can and told me with cheerful malice that he liked it better when I wasn't visible. I did what the script required. I rang up, I nodded, I took bills like a machine that spits them out. And all the while, out past the canopy, past the gravel and the pump with its out-of-order bag, the night arranged itself into the shape of the hour it needed to be for me. I'd love to tell you I beat it. I'd love to tell you I found the spoonerized loophole, the wrong detail I could set right so the tape jammed and coughed me into a new song. I'd love to tell you I confessed to the deputy who I wasn't, and he put a hand on my shoulder and said my name like a man says the name of a thing he respects. I'd love to tell you there's a way out of rooms that pretend they don't contain you. There might be. If there is, it's as simple and as impossible as this. You forgive a night for what it has already done. On the last round, just before the chime that wasn't, I took my wallet and I took the receipt and I put both in the drawer under the packs of gum. I wrote in the logbook in a handwriting I barely recognized as gentle. If found, let the kid with lightning pants pay for her candy. It wasn't a spell. It was a kindness, the only coin I had left. I took the deputy's card and instead of calling, I wrote on the back with the gas station pen that skips, check the camera, nothing there. That way, when he came and he wasn't looking for me but for the shape of a nothing that had my outline, he could hold something I'd touched and know he wasn't the only one who noticed. And then I stood behind the counter, in the place where the screen kept me safe from being watched die. And I waited for the chime that would ring, even when the doors didn't open. I listened to the hum that was a heartbeat, that was a machine, that was a hymn. I watched the moths fling themselves against their heaven. I breathed. I remembered the butterscotch Travis kept for kids and the way he tapped the counter twice when he thought he was funny. I thought about how sometimes a person gets lost because they are loved in a way that pins them to the moment that ended them. I thought about how a store, like a person, learns to survive on habit, and how habit is just the body's way of making meaning when the mind can't keep up. Want to say the man came in and I held his gaze and spoke his name, and he put his head down and wept because something finally recognized the worst part of him. That's not how the world works. He came in like a shadow, convinced it was a door. He said my not name. He reached with his not empty hand. The store did its old building groan. The neon blinked. The camera refused me. The night took what it had come for. The chime made its cheerful mistake. And then, after all of that, the hum carried on because it always does. In the morning, If there is such a thing as morning here, the day manager comes in and tuts about the surfaces, says the coffee tastes like feet again, says he doesn't like working with ghosts because ghosts don't stalk the ice. He signs the logbook with the long tail on his R, the one he's been worrying at since high school like a scab that will not close. He sees the note about the girl and keeps change in his palm until one of the high school cashiers shows up for day shift. He shakes his head at the security feed because it's old and we can't afford a new one, and anyway, who needs to see what we already know? He breathes this place the way men breathe the truck cabs they were born in. He does not see me. That is a mercy I can name. Sometimes a car pulls up just short of the pumps and then backs away. Sometimes the chime rings when the air conditioner kicks. Sometimes a man in a brown jacket slows in the turn lane and looks but does not stop. Sometimes a girl in lightning pants leaves a handprint on the glass and a clerk who will never be on camera wipes it away. Careful, like he's taking a temperature. I can't tell you if tonight is the night it ends. I have learned not to pretend I'm in charge of endings. But I can leave this if a leaving is possible from where I stand. A picture of the counter that won't take your reflection. The moths shoulder-checking the blue neon. The hum that sounds like a heart you forgot you had. The scent of penny candy and old coffee and something iron in the air. Just enough to make the R in your name feel like it's missing a tail when you sign for what you're taking. If you ever stop here on your way somewhere better, and you feel the urge to glance at the monitor, do it. Not to see me. To see the space where I learned how to stand. If you hear the chime ring and nobody walks in, don't be afraid on my behalf. This is my job. This is my last checkout. And if you leave a note for a girl who comes in with no shoes and a storm in her eyes, make it gentle. Let that be the part that changes, if anything does. I took the job because the hospital parking garage was quiet at 3 a.m. That's the truth of it. I was tired of people. Cashiers with 1,000-yard stares. Night managers who thought they were drill sergeants. The drunks who came in just before close and argued with a soda machine. I wanted a place where the noises had names. Fans, compressors, elevators, wheels. When you clean for a living, you start to hear wheels in your sleep. Little ghost circles ticking over tile, whispering of floor wax and bleach. The posting said Environmental Services Technician, Night Shift, Sub-Basement. That sounded fancy for a mop and a cart, but I didn't care. City Hospital. Huge old thing with additions tacked on over a century. They gave me a badge, a cart with a squeaky bin, 2 bottles of disinfectant with labels that made my tongue feel dry just reading them, and a key ring heavy enough to tilt my hip. My supervisor, thin woman named Alma with a bun pinned so tight it shone, walked me down past radiology, past the laundry with its roaring dryers, past the central sterile room that smelled like hot plastic and water. Key here, key there. Beeping badge and green lights winking like small permissions. She had this way of talking like each sentence came out measured on a lab scale. And she never said please. She said, "You will need to," and "You will not. You will not," she said, and squared herself to me. Move the gurney in the corner of the morgue. Not your cart, not your brooms, not for mopping, not ever. Go around it. You understand? There are 100 things you can ask in a moment like that. Why, is it broken? Is there a body on it? Who does it belong to? But something in her eyes told me all those questions would roll off her like water off waxed tile. Okay, I said, easy as you please. People think curiosity is some brave engine that pushes you down into deeper truths. Mostly it's a dog that gets you bit. She nodded. Sub-basement, morgue corridor, service elevator 5. If something makes you uncomfortable, you come up. You do not wander. It is a maze down there. Do your rotation, sign your sheets, and stay on the cameras. The cameras are for your safety. I didn't know what she meant about staying on the cameras, but I learned. There were monitors on a shelf in the sub-basement, monochrome squares blooming with light like flowers in a dark river. One showed the elevator, another the corridor outside the morgue doors, another the room with the drains and steel tables, and one the loading bay where the big trucks brought supplies at dawn. Most hours nothing happened. That's what I liked. You can't imagine what a relief that is until you've spent years with people inventing problems in your face. My first night, I learned the smell. Old cold, bleach and bodies. Not rot, never that, because the place was airtight, but the memory of rot. You could feel it along the back of your tongue like a word you haven't said out loud in years. The morgue room itself wore stainless like an apology. Tables with rails, big rolling fridges with small square doors, a sink with a hose curled like a sleeping snake. The gurney sat in the corner. At a glance, it looked like any other. Flat chromed frame, 4 casters with rubber rims, white sheet folded over the top with hospital corners so crisp they could cut. Maybe it was the way it faced the elevator, as if it meant to catch the first ride up. Maybe it was that nothing had dust on it here except that. In the corner, you saw a skin of dust on the sheet and the rails. It should have made it ordinary. Somehow it did the opposite. I worked around it. It became a game to me. I'd angle my mop to draw a smooth, bright crescent on the floor just shy of its wheels. The wax would take light like water, and I'd stand there a second watching it dry. The fluorescent tubes overhead hummed and buzzed and didn't always come fully awake at the same time, so rows of light would ripple on and off down the corridor like something breathing. Alma had not been wrong about the maze. Doors led to other doors, some with red tape across them and paper labels that had yellowed into bone colors. Service tunnels ran away beneath the hospital's belly. Concrete floors damp as subway platforms, pipes sweating and ticking. You could hear the building working at all hours, like a whale far below the surface, enormous and indifferent. The first 3 nights in a new job always feel like someone else's life. You haven't made your little rituals yet. My rituals are small. I like 2 paper cups of bitter coffee, one at midnight, one at 4:30, and I like to wipe down the elevator buttons twice even if I don't have to, because I picture all the fingers that have pressed those arrows with their hopes attached. I like to eat my sandwich by the loading dock with the door cracked, smelling the city's damp cold. Little things that say this is my place. By the 4th night, your body trusts the clock again. That's when I noticed it. The gurney wasn't where it had been. Not dramatically, not center stage with its wheels aligned to the door. Maybe 3 inches over, closer to the elevator. The sort of difference you only see if you know the pattern of your own mop swirls. I almost opened my mouth to say something to no one. Then I laughed at myself. Floors have a slope. Casters wiggle. The air handler kicks on and 1,000 pounds of air slithers under a door. You let a thought like that walk around inside you and it grows claws. I mopped the rest of the room. I went to the monitors. On one, a tiny grayscale version of myself, glided my mop along the tiles. I tried to see the gurney there, tried to confirm its position. The camera's angle made the corner look like a squeezed triangle of shadow. The sheet shone just enough to prove it existed. I told myself I'd check it again later. I told myself not to think about how the dust would tell the tale if anything moved. 2 nights later, closer. I noticed when the elevator doors wumped open and stopped a whisker from the gurney's foot. If that little rubber strip on the elevator face had been any thicker, or if the gurney had been 2 inches further out, they would have kissed. I backed my cart into the room carefully, as if I might rattle something. I stood there a long time, mop in my hands. The sheet was folded perfectly, but not with that machine precision you get on a gurney that's never been used. There was a soft place along its middle, a dip. It might have been nothing more than a crease from its own weight. It might have been where gravity remembered a body. I told Alma about it on my lunch break. She doesn't open a topic with how the ghost treated you, but she understands the way night talk goes. We were on the bench by the vending machines under a bulletin board with staff notices for CPR classes and a flyer for a lost pair of glasses. "It moves," I said. I didn't touch it, I swear. "But it moves." She drank her tea without changing her face. "Do not move it," she said, mild as ever. "I'm not." "Someone else, do not," she said, and the quiet fell into the words like a coin into a well. Then she softened. "The wheels may not be locked right. These things happen. You do not need to worry. Do your rotation. Stay on the cameras." The idea that somebody was teasing me sat wrong. You don't poke at the new guy in a morgue. It isn't like rigging the time clock to blow confetti or leaving a rubber spider in a locker. A place like that deserves respect, and there are people who'll tell you that's superstition, but the pep is in the step when they walk by the door. I waited until 2 in the morning, when the building had sunk into its deep breath. I didn't mop in there. I stood calm as I could and watched the elevator camera. I watched the gurney, a bright sliver in that bent corner. For 40 minutes, nothing at all happened. Then the elevator counterweight thudded somewhere in the shaft and went up to carry an empty car to nobody. And I swear to you, the gurney's casters ticked. It was not dramatic. It was not a cinematic lurch. It was the sound of a shopping cart wheel settling against a seam in the tile, and then easing forward as if gravity were slightly different here. When I went in, it had gained a finger's width. The next morning, a unit clerk named Cora talked to me while I was wiping the buttons in the new wing. She had hoop earrings and acrylic nails painted the color of wet cherries, and she called everybody baby, but not in a way that made you feel small. "You the one they got down on B2?" she asked. "They always put the quiet ones down there first. Like the hospital's gonna teach you its alphabet." She smiled, but there was a piece of it that didn't go past her lips. "You make sure you don't get lost." People do. In the tunnels, I mean. They cut through to save time. Then they hit one of those cross corridors where the lights are out and they turn twice, and it's like the subway lines except worse. "What's worse than the subway lines?" I asked. "Nothing," she said cheerfully and stuck her gum in the corner of her mouth. "But there's a whistle down there. You hear it, you stay put. You hear wheeling anyway. You go upstairs." "I thought there weren't supposed to be any whistles." "Then why do people keep hearing one?" she said and sashayed away, leaving the smell of strawberry shampoo in her wake and 10,000 little questions in mine. By the 6th night, I made a little ritual of photographing the corner with my phone when I came in, then again at 3, then again before I left. That felt like cheating, like bringing a scale to a magic show. The photos didn't show much. Maybe the angle shifted. Maybe I was making patterns where there were none. The mop crescent around the wheels had widened enough that there was a crescent of old floor showing. The sheet, pressed so perfect it was like someone smoothing it in their sleep, had a wrinkle in it that kept moving toward the elevator too, like a fold on the surface of water pushed along by a boat below. On the 8th night, it wasn't there at all. I rolled my cart to the door and then I just stopped. It was like walking into your kitchen and finding that the fridge has been moved sideways into the dining room, and no one wrote you a note. You hear about people who stumble into silence and get stuck in it like quicksand. That's what it was. The fluorescent lights flicked and steadied. The stainless steel reflected my little person shape back at me, thin and bent with a mop in his hands. The corner where it had stood cleaned up sharp and dark like a tooth pulled and the gum pressed. There were faint commas of dust on the tile, tiny half-moons, traces where the wheels had been. They ran in jittery lines out toward the elevator. I would love to tell you I turned around and went upstairs. I would love to tell you I did the sensible thing. I went to the monitors instead. I looked at last night's tape. There wasn't tape, not anymore. It was a drive on a little black box, but the metaphor is the same. Scrubbing backward, I watched the room rewind. My mop shrinking, my body reconstructing its movements piece by piece. At 2:13 a.m., the elevator doors sighed open for no one. The corridor lights down the tunnel flickered like dominoes falling. On the morgue camera, the sheet caught a little light, and then I saw it. The gurney easing toward the door with that small, elastic roll a locked wheel has when it's forced. You know how a heavy thing will start to move and then it moves easier? That was not this. This was a series of stops and starts, almost like a person remembering how to walk. You think cameras make you feel safe, but sometimes they make you feel watched. And watched is a long way from safe. Security keeps their own monitors upstairs. I took the elevator to the main floor. Night security is a big guy named Templeton who wears his belt high and reads old detective magazines. He looked up at me as if I were a tall, pale ghost. "Lost?" "It moved," I said, and my voice sounded like it belonged to someone with a small chest. "What moved?" he said, and didn't put the magazine down. "The gurney. In the morgue." He sighed, set the magazine on the desk like a card he was changing. He rolled back in his wheelie chair and tapped a keyboard with one finger. "You see our feed?" One of his screens opened a window with my same grayscale flowers blooming. He shared a time and we watched together, heads tipped like pigeons. There it was. At 2:13, elevator doors sigh, lights ripple, sheet brightens, gurney moves. At 2:14, it moved again. At 2:16 again. Every time the elevator counterweight thudded in the shaft, you could see the gurney's near wheel do that little tick. "Casters," he said, as if saying it made it true. "You got a slope down there. Airflow." "It goes out the door," I said quietly. "Oh," he said, watching. "Huh." He hit a key. "Let's see the elevator." He snapped the view over. The gurney appeared from the edge like something floating into frame. It glided to the elevator and stopped. Then, and this he did not say casters about, then it rose. Not high, not magically up into the air, just enough that the bottom lip of the elevator car could slide below it and not catch. It looked like someone lifted the near end by the rails just a few inches. The sheet fell around the edges and stayed. The elevator doors shut on a white drape and did not catch, and when they opened again, that white was gone. Templeton's mouth opened, closed. He looked exactly like a man about to figure out that a word he's been using for years has had a different meaning all along. He stabbed the button for the corridor camera. There was one long view of the sub-basement tunnel, a place I avoided because the floor had a fur of damp on it, and the air always smelled like before a thunderstorm. The walls were poured concrete, unpainted. At the far end, the elevator doors opened and the gurney pushed out. It rolled without hurry, as if someone behind it, someone very tired, someone who knew this route, had their fingers on the rails. The camera didn't go far enough to show where it went. Templeton pushed the keyboard like there were ants in it. "All right," he said, and I admired the way some people can put their hand on their panic and press it flat for a minute. "All right," he picked up his radio. "Dispatch, this is Templeton on nights. I've got a potential equipment thing down on B2. I'm going to go look. If you lose my signal, call me back." "You're going down there?" I said, and wanted to add, "with me?" But he was already standing, his belt squeaking, his keys chiming like glass. We rode together in the elevator and said nothing. The doors opened on the sub-basement, and the air that came in smelled cold and rented from another century. The lights were set to a motion sensor, so they bloomed one by one as we moved, each humming tube waking its neighbors. The wheels of his chair were still warm in my mind. He didn't sit now. He walked with a cop's roll, knees slightly bent, shoulders open. The corridor stretched in a straight line and then kinked left in a dogleg. We reached the corner and turned. The tunnel beyond looked like the inside of an ear. Rounded, damp. The concrete had pocked where the forms had leaked while it was poured, and the ceiling hung low enough to make your scalp itch. The gurney left tracks in the wet like a boat's wake. They ran away into the dark, right down the center, sure as paint. I had the instinct to step in them, like a child putting his feet into his father's footprints in snow. I did not. We followed the trail. Something dripped in the distance with that hollow sodium sound pipes make. Twice we passed doors set into the concrete, heavy gray slabs with latches like bank vaults. One had red tape across it that had blackened with time, more stain than stripe. The other had no label at all. Templeton breathed a little heavier, but his walk didn't slow. He lifted his radio and said, "Dispatch, Temple here, we're in the tunnels on B2. No, the other side of sterile. Copy." There was a poof of static and a voice like paper. He let the radio fall back to his shoulder. We came to a T-junction and the tracks split. I say tracks, but what I mean is thin scuffed lines and wet, an interrupted skim of dust. "Going left 2, going right." One that swerved and corrected like a person with a bad ankle. Templeton frowned. "How does a cart split?" "It didn't," I said, and then tasted the copper of my own stupidity. He looked at me to see if I was making a joke. His face said, "Do not joke." The lights down both corridors were dimmer and farther apart. You could see small things in the distance and imagine large things between the bulbs. He chose left. Of course he did. We followed the double marks to a door I had never seen. It had a stencil above it that said cold storage in letters the color of scabs. The lock was new. The door was not. He tried his keys and then just stopped, as if the act of trying defeated itself. "We don't keep more than one," he said. "We don't. There's just the 2 rooms off the main and the little fridge. Maybe the extra was set up for, during the pandemic," I said. The word felt too big for the space we were in, like a balloon trying to pass through a keyhole. "Maybe," he said. He did not sound convinced. "We'll go right." We were halfway turned when something knocked on the other side of the door. He froze. I froze. It wasn't a polite rap. It wasn't frantic. It was the kind of knock a person uses when they know you. And you'd better answer because the time for silly excuses is over. 3 steady thumps with the soft drum of flesh. He put his palm to the door like he could read a pulse through it. His eyes went a little wide. The radio coughed. A voice said, "Temple? Everything all right?" He did not move his hand. There was a second knock. A shorter one, single beat. Then something, dragged a metal edge along the floor inside. I saw his hand leave the door and hang there, as if he'd thought of pulling it away and then changed his mind and his limb had not yet gotten the memo. "Anybody in there?" he called. The sound wasn't right. It pinged around and came back thin. A voice came from behind the metal. It said his name. "Temple," it said, in that flat steam-burned tone of someone whose throat had been through a winter. It made it 3 syllables. Tempola. Temple jolted as if someone had reached through him with a fishhook. He grabbed my sleeve hard enough to pinch. "We're going right," he said through his teeth. We went right. "There's fear that makes you run and there's fear that makes you quiet." This made me quiet. I felt like my bones had acoustic panels around them. The lights at this stretch hummed higher. Little moths I had never seen before clicked at the plastic covers. I kept my eyes on the floor where the single track did that shambling swerve, then suddenly straightened and went clean. The corridor dead-ended in a wall of cinder block painted the color of a drowned man. In the middle of it, someone had cut a door much later. The edges didn't match. The frame had been slotted into a hole like a tongue in a gap tooth. There was no label. There was no lock I could see from this side, just a push bar, cool gray. The gurney marks went right through it. Templeton didn't say anything. He nudged the bar with 2 fingers. The door tisked open into old air. I don't know if you've ever been in a place a long time after people stopped making new memories in it. It isn't silence. It isn't stillness. It's like walking into a pocket where the world's hum has changed key. The ceiling here was lower and the lights were brighter and meaner. The room beyond was larger than it had any right to be. It was a morgue in the way a painting of a field is a field. You recognize the shapes, tables, drains, drawers, but none of it belonged to the hospital I knew. The corners had old patterning of tile you don't see anymore. Little hexes in a cream so yellowed it looked jaundiced. The floor had patches where the old tile had been removed and new concrete poured, but the patches didn't match. It looked like an apology badly meant. There were at least a dozen gurneys. At first I thought they were empty. Then I saw the sheets. I had always imagined sheets in morgues as flatter than that. These had shapes, peaks and valleys, details. One had a kind of blister in the fabric where a knee would be if the legs bent. One had the faint suggestion of fingers near the rail. One had a stain as round as a coin that had spread and then dried. I am not a squeamish man. I have wiped up things that would send most folks to church. But there was something in those shapes that reminded me of the sand sculptures kids make and then walk away from, and the tide reshapes them into other faces. Templeton whispered, "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," in a voice that sounded like he had never said those names before and was trying them on for the first time. There were foot tags. Paper tags, the old kind, threaded with string. Some had no writing at all, just blank rectangles, pale tongues. Some had names. I saw the first one against my will. You know how when you read a billboard you think you might not see it, and then you have it in your head and it won't come out? The handwriting didn't look like anyone I knew. It had that stiff nurse's charting hand, neat and without adornment. Somebody had put her last name there too, and a number. The sheet over that gurney was flat at the chest but lifted high at the shoulders, like a person shrugging at bad news. My mouth said, "We should get out," but my feet moved forward of their own little minds. The second tag said, "Alma." I laughed. A single tiny barking sound that embarrassed me even as it left my throat. Temple's head snapped. I showed him the tag. "She's upstairs," I said. The laugh tried to come again and I squeezed it off. I pictured Alma with her flat shoes and her bun and her measured voice. I pictured the way she had not wanted to talk about a moving gurney. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. Across the room, a drain made a sound like someone trying to remember a name. On the third tag, my own, I expected shock to feel big. It feels very small. It feels like your heart cracking a knuckle. I stared at that little paper rectangle with my name on it like a bill I hadn't meant to open yet. My first name complete. My last name spelled right. The number next to it did not mean anything to me. No dates, no diagnosis. The sheet on that gurney had a shape under it that did not fit. Too many angles. As if someone had tried to wrap a pile of river rocks in a mannequin and had not gotten it smooth. Temple had his radio in his hand. He did not remember lifting it. His thumb was on the button. He said nothing. On the far side of the room, something wheeled. Not much. A caster ticked against a tile seam. Then silence poured back in. The fluorescent lights hummed and the sound trembled like water burning. There are times you understand a thing and it takes the weight off you. Then there are times understanding is a heavier bag than the not knowing. This was the second kind. I thought of Alma's small measured voice and the way she said, "You will not," as if the hospital itself had spoken through her. I thought of Cora's earrings and strawberry hair and the way she called me baby. I thought of the gurney slipping into the elevator like a well-rehearsed secret. I thought of the smell you only get in holes dug long ago and filled in a hurry. I don't know why I lifted the sheet. I know I shouldn't have. I know that in the movies you'll yell at the person doing the stupid thing, but those people have never met the life that lives in a small motion. I put my fingers under the edge and raised it to my own chest height, and what was underneath was not a face, and it was not a face. It was a suggestion of a person, like someone had carved a man out of the leftover pieces of other men. The features were wrong, too close together and too smooth, and in the place where the mouth should have been there was a dark hole like a burn in paper. The chest didn't have ribs. It had something that had meant to be ribs and had changed its mind halfway. I dropped the sheet and it floated down exactly the way a sheet floats when it knows more than you do. "We're leaving," Temple said. "Now." We backed out the way you back away from a sleeping animal you thought was stuffed. He put his hand on the push bar and the door wouldn't go. I watched his knuckles go white. He jerked it. It still didn't move. Behind us, a wheel chirped, then chirped again. Then casually, another across the room answered it. "Temple," a voice said from the far end, and I would have sworn it was Cora's. And then another voice said, very calmly, very close, "Do not move the gurney." The words did not come from a throat. They came from the lights. He slammed the bar with his shoulder and it hissed open. The hallway beyond looked like a miracle. The moment the door latched, two things happened. The fluorescent at the end of the corridor went dark and a whistle blew. High and soft and steady. It was not a hospital whistle. It was a sound with sand in it. Templeton turned so fast his belt bit into him. We ran. There's no dignity in a run like that. Only the foolish hope that acceleration can outrun geometry. I was halfway to the dogleg when something bumped my cart in the other corridor. I hadn't even known I'd left it parked outside the morgue room like a tethered dog. It rolled on its own, one wheel squeaking the way a violin is a squeak shaped into music. For a stupid second, I thought how I would have to fill out a work order for that squeak. Then the cart rolled against my shin and the bucket inside slopped gray water onto my pants and the bleach in it made my eyes sting. "Go," Templeton said, as if I had been waiting for his permission. We didn't stop at the elevator. We took the stairs like people who believe stairs are more honest. At the landing there was a line of something on the floor, dark and almost glittering. I thought oil. I thought animal. When my foot hit it, my soul slid and I caught myself on the rail and smelled it. Not rot, not even blood. A old sweet smell, like cut flowers in a warm room. I know later I will have a better word. I don't need it now. On the main floor, the world looked slightly wrong. The lobby lamps seemed hung at new angles. The clock ticked loud. A woman at registration read a magazine and looked up and smiled a little, as if we were returning from a field trip. Templeton went to his desk, put both hands on it, and stood there with his back to the monitors. He said nothing for a long time. Finally, he touched his radio button and said, "Dispatch, we need maintenance down B2. We have a door that's sticking." "Copy," the paper voice said. It did not ask what door. I went home after my shift and didn't sleep. I have had nights like that. You try to pull the night's noise out of your ears and it just keeps clinging. I watched my sink fill and drain. I counted the lines on my ceiling. At 5 in the afternoon, I got up and put on my badge again. I could have called in. I could have told him I had a migraine. I don't know why I didn't. Maybe I needed to see if the world kept going in a straight line. Alma was in the hallway outside the locker room. She nodded to me like we were conspirators. "Here is your rotation," she said, and handed me my sheet. Her bun was tight enough to lift the corners of her eyes. "One change. Do not go beyond the morgue doors. You will do the corridor and the elevator bank and the room with the fridges only." "Who's down there?" I asked. The question surprised me with its edge. "In the other room?" "What other room?" she said. Not even a question. "The extra cold storage. The one with the old tile. The one with—" I flapped the sheet at her as if the sheet could explain. A paper tag with my name on it limped between my fingers. "There is no extra cold storage," she said, with a patience that felt like the top of a very deep well with a body in it. "Do your rotation. Stay on the cameras," so I did. That's the truth of it. I did my job. I wiped the buttons. I polished the stainless. I mopped a crescent along a corner where there was now no gurney and felt the idiot relief you feel when a bully takes a day off. At 2, the elevator doors tried to close on an empty space 3 times. On the 4th, they slid together and held for a long moment like lips pressed tight to keep in a secret. I went to the monitors. On the tape from last night, there was nothing after Temple had gone back upstairs. The gurney did not return on screen. The little white sheet in the corner did not reappear. Sometimes an absence sits in a room like a piece of furniture. I spent part of my break with Cora in the break room, pretending to read the employee handbook. "You look like you saw the bottom of a well," she said and popped her gum, then caught herself and spit it into a napkin with an apology. "You hear the whistle?" "I heard a whistle," I said. "Do you know anything about a second morgue?" She laughed. It popped high and real. "Baby, this whole city is a second morgue. You think they dig up all the old bones when they pour foundations? They scoop, they pour, the ground is a pocket for old names." She put her hand on mine. Her nails were like small moons. "You keep your head. You don't wander. If you hear wheels, you go up. You let the night have what it's already taken. If you had a tag with your name on it," I began, and couldn't find the end of the sentence. "You'd better spell it right," she said, and that didn't make me feel better. That night, I did not hear wheels. I heard dragging, a sound like fabric pulled over tile, measured and sure. It came from the tunnel beyond the door with no label. I didn't open it. I watched the monitor. The corner camera caught nothing but its bent triangle of shadow. The elevator camera showed doors that breathed. The corridor camera, the one with the rounded ceiling, showed a sliver of movement, a suggestion of white like a folded letter slid across a desk. The sound slid under the door like cool wind. About an hour before dawn, when the loading dock got its first clatter of deliveries and the long truck backed up with its beep beep beep. Apologizing to the morning, I walked to the morgue room with a stack of clean sheets. Alma had put them on my rotation and I had said nothing. The room met me like a photograph of itself. The gurney was back in the corner. It sat there as if it had not left, as if the crescent of floor I had mopped around it had never gotten its breath back. Dust lay on the rails. The sheet was folded with that careful hospital corner again. There was one difference. A tag threaded through the rail. It was not the old foot tag style. It was a plastic loop, printed in neat block type like a suitcase tag. The little card inside had my name, and under it, smaller, my job, Environmental Services Technician Night Shift. Someone had even put the ID number from my badge. No dates, no diagnosis. The space where you'd put cause was blank. I did not touch it. I backed out of the room the way you back away from a cliff when you realize the grass under your feet is overhung with nothing. Upstairs, Temple wasn't at his desk. Another guard sat there, young as a fresh haircut, his belt too big for him. He nodded. "Temple called in," he said. "He's out for a few days. You need something?" "No," I said, and meant no, I do not need a single thing you are capable of giving me. On the next night, the tag was gone. The gurney was an ordinary corner thing again. I mopped my crescent. The fluorescent above me buzzed, flickered, came to light as if thinking the decision over. On the elevator camera, the doors opened on nothing and closed on nothing and kept their counsel. In the corridor deep down, the motion sensor lights clicked on and off sometimes with no one there to earn them. I have tried to tell this in a way that makes sense, because you are listening, and if you're going to give me your ears, I ought to pay you with a straight line. But the days don't move that way down there. They slide. I began to notice other things. A damp stain on the concrete that you could not dry with any fan, and in its shape a city map, a whistle that only blew when I fought sleep hard enough that my head nodded and jerked. Wheel marks that led to doors with no handles. Names on tags that matched the people who chatted in the break room and made coffee too strong, and complained about the heat in the rehab wing. Once I passed Alma in the main corridor and her bun had come down a little, a short loose curl at the back of her neck. It was the most human thing I had ever seen on her. She saw me see it. Her hand went up and smoothed it away like erasing a word. One dawn around 5, when the world is meanest because the light is a rumor you don't dare believe yet. I went down into the tunnels past the dogleg, to the door with the bank vault latch. Everyone tells you not to. They say stay where the cameras can see you. They say stay on the angles that show up upstairs. They say don't wander. I wandered. The door with the red tape had a small hole in the tape where someone had wedged it with a fingernail. I touched the hole. The tape peeled on its own like it had been waiting. The door opened. Inside there were shelves of old files, paper that had grown stiff with time. Ledger books. There were dates. There were years where the pages were thin and the writing thinner, as if the ink had been watered. Plague, a word written over and over. Words like indigent and unclaimed and transferred and burned. There was a list of numbers that matched the numbers on the tags. I found mine, Next to it, blank space. This made it worse. There are few things worse than a blank next to your name. When I came out, a man stood in the corridor. He looked like he might once have been on the maintenance team. The old kind. The kind with a cap and a set of wrenches that belonged to him more than to the hospital. His shirt was clean, but an old design of logo was ghosted on it. The way images sometimes stay on your eyes. He said, "You doing the floors?" "I am," I said, polite as church. He nodded, and his nod made something small inside me relax. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a metal tag and handed it to me. It had a number stamped in it, not mine. "Goes to the South Tunnel," he said. And for a moment I could smell his aftershave, an old blue smell that my grandfather used. "Doors sometimes stick. Is there a second morgue?" The words came out of me so sudden I was embarrassed by them. "There's always a second one," he said, as if he were telling me the time. "And a third. We got the wood one, the old brick one down by the freight, and the one nobody talks about because it ain't on any map." He looked past my shoulder, toward the door with the wrong frame. They come up sometimes when the pressure's wrong. Building size and things that are supposed to be settled aren't. He looked back at me. His eyes were tired. "Don't move what wants moving. Don't stop what wants stopping. That's the rule." "What happens if I do?" I asked, and he smiled so gentle I wanted to sit down. "You don't," he said. "You learn not to." When he walked away, he didn't make much sound. His footfalls were thinner than they should have been. I held the metal tag to my palm until it left a little burn, then slipped it into my pocket. "I have it still. I don't think it will open anything now. You want an ending?" "I know, I want one too. A clean cut where you can say, 'Here is where the nightmare woke me.' But the truth is, nights stack. On a Thursday, the gurney in the corner will be a gurney, and you will mop your crescent and go heat your sandwich by the loading dock. On a Friday, it will move a finger's width and you will say the floor is not level. On a Saturday, the elevator will take it, and you will follow its wheel marks as if a string has been tied to your heart and the other end knotted to a railing you cannot see. And you will see a room that does not belong to any blueprint, and in it, sheets shaped like the memory of people you know. On Sunday, your name will be on a tag, and then it will be gone. On Monday, the new guard will sit at the desk and smile like this is any job in any city. On Tuesday, a whistle will blow and you will hold perfectly still because the whistle is not for you. That is the ending. That is all people like me get. When I finish my shift, sometimes in the parking garage, I will hear a small wheel skitter over a seam in the concrete. I will look up and see nothing. I will count my keys. I will rub the place on my thigh where the heavy ring sits, and I will tell myself it is a normal thing to want to go back and look again. You can't just leave it, your mind says. The lights hum like they're making a promise. I count the hums and try to build a prayer out of them. It doesn't take. The last thing you should know is this. A week after the night with Temple, I saw Alma in the hallway again, and she stopped me with a hand in the air like a conductor asking for quiet. She said, "You will not move the gurney," and I said, "I won't." She looked past me then, as if something had passed just behind my shoulder, something on small, quiet wheels, and in a low voice meant for the air more than for me, she added, "You will not get in the elevator if the doors open for no one." And I said, "Okay," and meant it, though I did not know when I would be asked. She smoothed a flyaway from her bun, as if a breeze had found her in a hallway with no windows. Then she said good night, and walked away in the slow, measured way of someone who knows where the floors tilt and where the air is thin, and has learned how to cross it without a sound. When the doors open with that small respectful sigh at 2:13, and I am standing there with my cart, sometimes there is an impression on the sheet in the corner, the shape of a palm pressed into the fold, as if someone is bracing to stand. I hold my breath. The fluorescent above me flickers once, twice. The light steadies. I back away from the threshold, and in the glass I can see just enough of myself to remind me I am still here. Then the doors close, making a mouth, and whatever went up goes up without me, as if the building, after all this time, has remembered its own rules. I don't know what floor they press. I don't want to learn that elevator's language. I keep my eyes low. I mop my crescent. I try not to think about the tag that fit my name too well, or the other names I might find there one night when I'm too tired to be careful. I've decided the only way to live the morning is to pretend I do not know the hospital's other alphabet, the one it keeps in its sleep. But I know the letter it gave me. I know my own. And every night, When the lights wake in a ripple and the air stirs like a long coat being shaken out, I hear the wheels in my sleep gentle and steady, and I tell myself out loud, if I have to, that when the doors open for no one, I will not step inside. That's how you stay on this side, I think. You learn which rides aren't yours. You let the living elevator take the living up and down, and you let the other elevator do what it does without ever asking where it goes. If you see a gurney in a corner, heavy with old dust and a sheet pressed just so, you give it room as if it were a person at a bus stop who has been waiting a long time. You do not move it. You do not touch the tag. You pretend not to notice that sometimes, if you look away and then look back, it has inched a little nearer to the door. You pretend all night, and then if you are lucky, you go home and the pretending lets you sleep an hour. That's the most honest finish I have. It isn't victory. It's not even escape. It's just the small grace of staying off an elevator that wasn't meant for you, while the fluorescent lights hum like tired things and the concrete sweats its old air, and below your feet somewhere under the second room and the third, under the poured slab and the paper maps and the bones, the city shifts in its place and remembers what it forgot. You don't choose the graveyard shift. It chooses you. That's what my supervisor, Dale, said the first night he handed me the bank of master keys and the faded blue polo with the stitched badge that read Maplewood Crossing Security. I needed the work. My other job delivering appliances had dried up, and after the divorce I got used to eating dinner at odd hours, talking to no one, and falling asleep to the TV's pale light. The mall felt like an extension of that, a wide, echoing place where daylight never really arrived, where music played in loops and nobody had to mean it. Most nights I parked by the service entrance behind the movie theater, killed the engine and listened as the car ticked itself cool. The air back there smelled like damp cardboard and fryer grease blown from the food court vents. Once you badge through the staff door, the corridor gives you a chill even in July, a concrete throat-swallowing sound. I'd swipe past dark storefronts with their metal grates down and their displays lit just enough to keep the mannequins from seeming completely dead. When you walk alone after midnight, you become aware of the softest things, the press of carpet under your soles, the hush of HVAC through vents overhead, the static from a screen that's been left on in some back room. The security office sits like a nerve center above the loading docks. It's nothing fancy, a desk scarred by years of coffee rings, a corkboard with old memos, 2 battered rolling chairs, a half fridge full of energy drinks and yogurt someone forgot, and 3 walls of monitors. 48 cameras feed into a hub that Dale says ain't smart enough to make our jobs obsolete, but dumb enough to get us blamed when something goes wrong. Each camera wears a little white label, Food CT1, North Wing 2, Gap Hall 3, and if you stare long enough, you start to feel like the mall is a sleeping thing and you're watching it breathe. Dale preferred nights at the desk. He was thick through the middle and walked with a limp from a high school football injury he never let us forget. He liked the radios quiet and the lights bright. He'd roll in around 10 with a paper bag that smelled like onion rings and talk about coupons. I didn't mind the peace. With the new renovation, there were more motion sensor ads, hollow-eyed models whispering about winter lines when you cross the invisible beam, and the cleaning crews worked later to buff the terrazzo floors until you could see yourself rippling as you passed. Sometimes teenagers hid after closing, daring each other to ride the escalator backward or steal a bench cushion. Sometimes a homeless man bedded down behind the potted ficus near the east bathrooms. You could talk to him if you kept your hands visible. He called me officer. I corrected him once and then stopped. The first night it happened, I wasn't even doing rounds. I'd been at the desk an hour, chewing on a toothpick and half listening to the late show on a little radio in the corner, eyes sweeping the grid the way a wiper blade sweeps glass. There's a rhythm to it. You let each square tell you it's fine before moving to the next. The food court was always a comfort, a big open geometry of tables and chairs, banners drooping like tired tongues, the burger place's Pepsi machine glowing blue like a fish tank. After closing, the floor crew stacked chairs on tables in neat pyramids. What remains is a chessboard between the cash registers. It looks like a place remade for adults. I blinked and she was there in Food CT2, an old woman. You know how some people wear their age like a cord of wood across their shoulders? She didn't. She stood upright the way girls do when they're learning to balance a book on their heads. Gray hair like dryer lint puffed around her face, a dark dress that hung straight as a drape, a coat buttoned wrong at the collar, Her hands were down at her sides. She wasn't moving, not even a tremble you'd expect from someone of years. She faced nothing, the middle of the court, half turned to the carousel of napkin dispensers. The resolution wasn't great, but I could see the small detail of her shoes. Sturdy, practical, the kind you polish at a kitchen table. I watched for 30 seconds, then a minute. She stayed a statue. Dale saw I'd stopped blinking and wheeled his chair close. "What's your trouble?" he asked. "Food court," I said. "Camera too." He ignored the old woman and watched me. "That's a supervisor trick." When I didn't look away, he finally turned. He let out a small sound, half grunt, half "oh," the noise men make when they've seen something that confuses them but they aren't ready to be worried. "Could be a cleaner's grandmother," he offered. "They clocked out an hour ago. Could be a mannequin someone moved as a joke. There's no store that..." He lifted a hand. "Radio." We both waited for the radio to chirp with housekeeping or maintenance calling in. It didn't. He leaned forward and tapped the screen with a fingernail, as if he could dislodge a stuck pixel. It made a hollow aquarium sound. "I'll go," I said. "Take your time," he said, which was his way of saying be careful without admitting that's what he meant. "You can do the whole trip from the office to the food court without touching fresh air. It's an L of fluorescent and elevator, then a split into carpet and tile. The mall after hours is like a church once the congregation has left. Big, artificially scented, full of places where people atone by spending." I walked past a poster of a smiling family with shopping bags so bright they looked photoshopped into existence. When my footfalls echoed, I tried to shorten my stride. In the polished black glass of the closed sunglass hut, there I was, a tall guy in a 2 blue polo, reedy at the shoulders, a face you'd forget unless you'd been married to it once. I don't know why I looked. Maybe to remind myself I was still there. I rounded the corner into the food court and understood something new about silence. Even the refrigerator hums in the fast food stalls seemed to tuck themselves aside, embarrassed. The chairs were stacked, the counters wiped. The burger place's neon burger onion shimmered in red and yellow, and the Pepsi machine glowed from under its clear plastic lip. The air smelled like old grease and a lemon cleanser that didn't quite mask it. There was no one standing in the center of the court. "Office, this is Mike," I said into my radio, not whispering and not loud. My voice floated back to me from the ceiling. "There's nobody here." Dale came back too quickly, which meant he'd been waiting. "Copy, she's there on the feed," he said. "Right in front of you. She's Mike, hold on." He tried to chuckle and couldn't find it. "Look up at camera 2, give me a wave." I looked at the housing, a round white eye hanging over the faux marble pillar. I raised a hand and waved like an idiot to an empty court. On the radio, I heard Dale suck a breath through his teeth. "What?" I asked. "Mike," he said, his voice moving onto a register he used when teenagers got brave. "She's 2 steps behind." "Ew!" I turned so fast my shoes squeaked. "Nothing. Just the stacked chairs and a mall map that still listed stores which had been boarded up during the renovation." "There's nobody," I said. "She moved," he said. "She's closer now. Don't, just hold up. I'm calling this in to just hold up." That was the first beat. Maybe you don't feel it out there, listening by your kitchen sink or in your car under the single light of a parking lot lamp. But in the moment, it pressed on me like a hand between the shoulder blades, something out of phase, a tiny dislocation in the way the world clicks. Back in the office, Dale had the feed on a loop. The old woman stood in the center of the court for a full minute. In the 20-second rewind, she was 5 feet closer to my position. In the 10-second rewind, she was closer still. We watched the clip 4 or 5 times. Her steps didn't appear. She was a piece on a board moved while our eyes were closed. Her face, when the camera happened to catch it, looked unbothered. If anything, preoccupied, as if she were listening for a stove timer or the ring of a landline in some other room. "I don't like this," Dale said. "You can see me?" I asked. He tapped another camera. In food court 1, I stood waving to nothing. In food court 2, there was the old woman and yes, me. Like a ghost of a person layered on the picture, transparent, edges fuzzed, so faint you'd think you'd smeared your glasses. It wasn't that the camera didn't pick me up. It was that it picked me up poorly, as if my importance were subject to review. We wrote an incident report with as few adjectives as we could and filed it under the date. Dale printed a copy and circled the time, 1:17 a.m., like it might matter later. He had a way of making odd things official, which probably kept us sane. Then he told me to stretch my legs. "Walk the West Wing," he said. Eyes open. I took the walk like a man who owes something and intends to pay. The West Wing had a strip of stores that pretended to be outdoors. Fake street lamps, a bench where no one sat longer than 60 seconds, planters with soil so clean you suspected hospital staff came to scoop it at night. The renovation had relocated the kids' play area and installed a pop-up museum about the mall's proud history, complete with a glass case of photographs showing groundbreaking ceremonies and the mayor with a shovel in the 80s. The oldest photo was the most interesting, a wide shot of a ribbon cutting in front of the food court when it had a different name. You could tell it was summer. Everyone wore light clothes, and in the back, under a canopy of balloons, a woman in a dark dress stood in perfect posture, just far enough to make detail a suggestion. I don't believe in omens. Growing up, Mom kept a calendar with prayers written on it, and she'd circle certain days like they contained a wire you could use to ground yourself. The only thing I inherited from her was the habit of watching for patterns. When you watch long enough, you always find them. The trick is to stop short of letting them tell you what to do. The second night, I told myself to expect nothing. Expectation makes a fool of you. I arrived with a thermos of black coffee and a ham sandwich in a plastic bag that sweat on the inside. I did my first round, counted the exit doors, checked the fire extinguisher's dates like Dale taught me, and returned to the office to find him frowning in the light of camera 9. He didn't swear. Dale never swore, but he said my name like a swear. "Look," he said. She was there again. Camera 9 labeled Food CT2. The old woman in the dark dress. Same good posture, same small shoes, same ineffable concern. The difference was angle. She faced directly into the camera, as if she had learned where it lived. The pixels in her pupils were so black the screen seemed open at 2 points. "Call maintenance," Dale said. "Maybe the camera's looping." Maintenance answered and made fun of us gently. Cameras don't loop on their own. They loop when someone tells them. No one told them. Dale told me to go, and I did. Because even if a thing scares you, there is relief in proving it has edges. A mall is never truly empty. Before midnight, a handful of late-show kids tumble out of the theater and shock themselves into silence when they see you. The last of the restaurant staff drag a bag of refuse that bumps and sways behind them like a reluctant child. After midnight, the mall becomes a building and nothing more. I rode the elevator down and had that sensation you might know from dreams where the doors open onto the wrong floor. The food court was right where I left it. The Pepsi machine glowed. A single napkin had fallen from a dispenser and lay crisp and perfect on the floor, like paper in a museum case. The old woman was not there. The radio's squawk made me jump. "Where are you?" Dale asked. "Food court," I said. "She's by the carousel map." There was a mall directory map with a red, "You are here." It had been updated with stickers for stores that were coming soon, a phrase too hopeful for a mall like ours. I turned to face it. She wasn't there. "She's at the fountain," Dale said, and then quickly, "No, closer. Mike, she's behind you again." I closed my eyes because sometimes that helps and listened. At first I heard nothing. Then there was the barest sound, thin as a breath on glass. Not footfalls, not fabric. It reminded me of my mother opening the oven to check if a cake had settled, the whisper that whooshes out when hot air meets the cool of the kitchen. I turned, there was no one. "Come back," Dale said. His voice had dropped deeper, not to comfort me, but because his throat had tightened. Back in the office, we watched playback. Each minute mark, she was closer by 2 feet. The strangest part was the way she held her fingers now. Thumb and forefinger almost together, like someone trying to remember a word just out of reach. When I moved through the frame, my body blurred like a rumor. After that, there wasn't a third night so much as there were nights that attached to one another like magnets. I slept poorly and woke feeling like I'd dreamed in the security office's fluorescent temperature. Things began to happen in little sibling pairs. 2 napkins in the same spot, 2 candy wrappers, 2 pennies heads up by the same potted plant. Memory does you no favors in a place like that. It tucks and smooths. You start to think, didn't there used to be a skylight here? Was that bench turned the other way last week? People told stories about Maplewood long before I worked there. Fire codes changed after a blaze in the 80s that shut the place for half a year. An electrical short in an old sign, someone's cousin said. Too much plastic in the fascia, another said. All of it burning the color of bad dreams. The story went that a few people died that day, not many. and none of them anyone you'd know. It was the mall's little secret, the way families have a relative they don't mention unless the holidays run long, and the dishes are stacked, and people pour a little too much whiskey into the coffee. I could have looked up the news archive. I didn't at first. Part stubbornness, part superstition. The mall fire felt like everything in my life I'd kept unexamined, in case the knowing changed what was true. I told myself to treat the job like any other, and for an hour here and there I succeeded. I learned the rhythm of the cleaning crew's machines. I learned which of the motion sensor ads liked to whisper the word soft when you weren't ready for it. I learned that in camera 12, if you stood a certain way, you could see the reflection of camera 9. It became a thing to watch. The little eye watching the little eye. The third week was when I began to see her where I shouldn't. Reflections are a liar's friend, I guess. They let you deny what you're seeing one heartbeat longer. I was walking the south wing past the shoe store with mirrored columns when, in the slim slice of black glass between two backlit posters, a woman stood too still to be anything but wrong. My first thought was she'd taken off her shoes. It made no sense, but the thought came like a cough. She looked like my mother caught in a daydream. When I turned to face the hall, the woman wasn't there. When I turned back to the glass, she had folded her hands and pointed them, small and together, toward me as if assessing the distance. "Office," I said into my radio. "You reading 9? "Reading 9, Dale said. "Anything?" "Nothing." "Say again." "Nothing, Mike. Food court's clear." "You want me to switch to 12? "No," I heard myself say too quickly, and I realized I was tired in a way that made decisions for me. That was the night the music misbehaved. It's not really music, just a loop of instrumental refrains designed to stop your mind from chewing itself. Around 3, the loop developed a hiccup. The strings would swell. The chords would do that glassy, empty thing you hear at chain clothing stores. And then a skip, a gulp in the sound, and a single note like a breath drawn between pursed lips. Security guys learn to ignore certain malfunctions, the way apartment dwellers learn to ignore the radiator clank that happens every night at 2:10 because the pipes have their own theology. But this was new. A skip at the same places in the hall each time, which meant it was tracking me. If I stood still, it died. If I walked, it stuttered along as if the ceiling were breathing in time with me. "Cut it," Dale told maintenance. Maintenance cut it, and the mall felt enormous and naked, like a room when the refrigerator stops. There was a relief in it, and then, a minute later, there wasn't. I broke and looked up the fire. I told myself it was to write a better report, but I think I needed to know if we were crazy or if we were a little bit sane in a place that had memorized grief. A librarian at the county archive was happy to help. She was the kind of woman who spoke in exact numbers. The Maplewood fire, June 17th, 30 years back. 5 dead, 2 shop girls, a teenage boy who'd snuck in to meet a girl at the fountain, a janitor, and an older woman whose name wasn't printed, which struck me as odd. The article said family not reached by press time, and then never ran a follow-up that I could find. The photo attached showed black smoke flowering through the skylight. In the lower corner, a figure you wanted to be a firefighter looked back toward the lens from inside the doors. It wasn't a firefighter. The helmet was wrong. The posture was different. That posture, head upright, shoulders square, hands poised as if to pinch a thread. I printed the story and taped it under the desk blotter and told myself I wasn't hiding it. That night I brought a sandwich and didn't eat it. I watched camera 9 more than was wise. The old woman came and went. Some nights she was a shadow in the corner of the court, which made me feel almost relieved. Like when a storm you thought would break only scuffs the horizon. Other nights she occupied the square completely. Then one shift in late August she wasn't on any camera, and yet the glass of every darkened store showed her faintly, not centered, but standing just outside where she'd be counted. That was the night she moved while I looked. If you've ever watched a person who's been still for too long finally crack a knuckle or look up from their hands, you know the way motion can sound. The old woman's head turned like a hinge had been oiled for the first time since it was forged. She looked left toward the burger stand, then right toward the pretzel place where the smell always sank into my shirt. Her hands, small and almost joined at the fingers, opened like a book being unglued, and then she lifted one foot and placed it down. Not a slide. A lift and a placement that acknowledged that space existed, that you couldn't simply be in two places because you'd made up your mind. I said into the radio, "Dale?" And he answered, "I see her." The thing about two men in a small room saying the word her is it fills up the corners. It made her real in a way we'd been denying. "Where are you?" he asked. "Office," I said. "She's not in food 9, he said. "She's in the glass." "What do you mean?" "Turn the hall cam, turn 12. "Look at the eyewear store," he said, and his breath hitched between the words. I turned 12 and saw my own reflection in a pillar. Behind my white lettering in the glass, she stood where space said she shouldn't. My reflection didn't overlap with her. It accommodated, like I was the afterthought. I did what men do when their skin tells them to move. I left the office. I left the chair rolling and the door half latched and the thermos sweating a ring onto the blotter. I didn't take the nearest path to the food court because the nearest path seemed like using your house key on a door that isn't your house. I cut through stock corridors and came at the court from the far side. I was not brave. I was hoping to catch the miracle unawares. The food court was empty. The Pepsi tank hummed. The napkin I'd seen the first night had gone, but there was a crease on the floor where it had been, as if a folded paper could bruise tile. The map glowed a soft, helpful red in the word here, and yet I will tell you this and you can keep your disbelief. I felt a breath that wasn't mine pull across my knuckles, and I saw a faint quiver in the corner of one camera housing as if air had thickened. I called, "Ma'am?" Before I understood how stupid that was, my voice came back to me, but on the second echo someone else's voice came with it and I didn't catch the words. Not noise, words just too faint like a radio station one highway off. It had the shape of "excuse me" or "is this the way" or "can you help?" I waited for a sign. When nothing came, I did what I could. I pulled a chair from a table, set it squarely in the middle of the court, and sat with my hands on my knees the way you sit in a hospital room with someone you love, because it's all you have to offer. I don't know how long I sat. I couldn't bear watching the cameras. Time is a liar in malls. The clocks are few and the light is counterfeit. Eventually Dale called to say, "Come back up." I stood and the chair made a sound like a foot dragging and I almost cried. There's a kind of bargain you strike with a haunting. You let it have your attention in exchange for not taking your life apart all at once. It will, if you let it, dismantle you by degrees. You'll start staying late. You'll miss a call from your sister and then another, and then stop calling. You'll drive home in the dawn and your hands will shake. You'll eat in your car and hate your own breath. I wasn't a man for dramatics. The divorce had wrung those out of me. But the week after I sat in the food court, I made 2 mistakes on my rounds and then a third. And Dale wrote me up for the second because if you don't write things down, they become rumors. We agreed not to tell the day crew. That was his idea. "They'll spook," he said. "They'll talk. You know how it goes." What I heard under that was, "This is ours." The mall was changing hands. The high-end stores wanted marble. The owner wanted glossy new tenants and moms who wear yoga pants like uniforms. Dale wanted something to remain that wasn't his limp or his onion rings. I wanted proof that I existed in one place long enough for the cameras to decide I mattered. The last night I worked there before I gave myself a sabbatical I could barely afford, the mall smelled like ozone. A storm crawled across the roof, clogging the drains with the leaves that had started to fall from the potted trees. The sound of rain up there turned the air into a soft roar that made conversation feel private. I liked it. I liked how things got defined by boundaries again. The desk, the door, the hall. I liked that even the motion sensor ads shut up when the power dipped. In camera 9, the food court rippled with reflections like a lake in wind. At 2:11 a.m., the power dimmed. Not a full outage, just a sag. All the screens in the office gray-washed and snapped back. Every camera reported and then sorted itself into the grid. In the brief between, in the space where pixels collapsed and rebuilt, I thought I saw a crowd. Not a lot of people, enough. It was the kind of glimpse you almost won't admit. Then the image steadied and there was the food court again, empty. A second later, one chair in the center of the room, one of the few we hadn't stacked because the leg was bent, shifted a quarter inch. It didn't skid. It lifted and set. I sat up so fast my knees cracked. "Dale," I said, "you get that?" "I got it," he said. The chair turned so the back faced camera 9. I had a child's idea in that moment, an idea so foolish it embarrassed me even in the dark. She wanted to sit and face me. And because it embarrassed me, it felt true. "Stay put," Dale said, which is what he always said. And I never had trouble obeying until that night. I left the office and the hallway seemed shorter than usual, like the building had heard me and pulled itself tight around my intention. The rain was harder now. I could hear it in the atrium where the skylight domed like the belly of a whale. When I stepped into the food court, the chair was turned back toward the tables the way we left it, as if I had imagined the shift. I took a breath that tasted like penny metal and old lemon cleanser, and then the power sagged again, and all the housings over my head clicked in little chain reactions. The chair scraped a full foot and stopped, not facing any direction I'd call formal. It pointed a degree off where you'd think. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to say, all right, okay, to thin air and to myself. Instead, I did what I had done before. I sat. This time, when I set my hands on my knees, the air in front of me cooled a few degrees the way air cools near doors in winter. My eyes watered, and not from emotion. It was a temperature thing, a physics thing your skin recognizes. I said, "You're safe," and realized too late how presumptuous that was. I don't get to decide for another person if they're safe. The sound in my radio was quiet static, a sound that often means the person you're trying to reach is listening and pressing the talk button, but can't find words. Her smell arrived before anything else. Not perfume, not powder. The closest I can get is the scent of a closet with good wood in it and a coat that's been worn to church every Sunday for a year. Here and gone, a breath of it. That's when I heard the words for the first time clear enough to understand. They were small enough that you might have missed them walking through the court. But I was sitting and I had already offered more attention than was wise. The words were these: "Is the way out this way?" I think I said yes. I might have said, "Tell me your name." I might have said my own, because sometimes that's all you can think to trade. What I know is that I stood, and that my reflection in the Pepsi machine looked tired and thin enough to break if you tapped the glass. The old woman stepped once into the place in the air where breath condensed. She was neither more nor less substantial than she had been on the feed. She was exactly herself, which is perhaps the most frightening thing. Her eyes were not hollow or pleading. They were busy with some kept list. The back of her dress showed a seam repaired by hand with dark thread. Her shoes were scuffed at the toes, left more than right. Her mouth wasn't a line. It had a soft bow at the top lip, as if it had once been used to smile often. She looked at the map and then at me, and then at the ceiling as if the skylight might speak, and then back to the map and then at me again. "I think," she said, and her voice did not sound spectral or theatrical. It sounded like a person deciding in a grocery aisle between two brands. "I think I've lost them." "Who?" I asked, because the mall trains you to ask what people might be looking for. She opened her hand as if to show me something that wasn't there. Then she looked over my shoulder, and her expression changed in that small, tender way you see in faces at weddings. She wasn't terrified. She wasn't relieved. She was both, and then she was neither, because something entered the court that wasn't me. They weren't a mob. They weren't even a group, not in the way you expect in these stories. They were spread, spaced with the peculiar geometry of crowds that don't wish to be a crowd. A young boy with wet hair, two girls whose skirts had scorch marks at the hem, a man in a maintenance jacket I'd seen on a hook in back corridors. More faces than I could track, each one wearing some small familiar detail like a clothing tag left unplucked from a sleeve. They occupied the court the way you occupy a place again in a dream. You know the route to the counter, where the light falls through the skylight, where the chill comes off the ice at the soda fountain. And yet you are careful as if a wrong footfall might put you through. I don't expect you to believe me. You're tired, it's late, you have your own troubles. But it happened, and if I don't try to put it in order here, it will come to me later in the way bad things do. Demanding and without context, like the sound of my ex-wife crying in the next room when she thought I couldn't hear. The boy who looked wet, I think from a sprint through a sprinkler or a fountain, put his hands to his mouth and then away again as if to call, and then to decide against calling. One of the girls touched the other's sleeve, not to hold her back, but to let her know that touch existed. The man in the maintenance jacket kept patting his chest where his ID lanyard would have been. None of them looked at me. They didn't look at the old woman either. They looked at a point near the mall directory where, if I had to guess, someone else stood. One of the girls said a name that might have been Mom, and then the light dipped, and then it was only the two of us again, the old woman and me, and then only me. Because I blinked and she was one pace farther from me and then another, and by the time I thought to reach out a hand, the air had warmed to Pepsi machine blue again. Back in the office, Dale had tears at the corners of his eyes he pretended were just from the coffee being too strong. He rewound the feed for me without me asking. This time the footage showed what I saw. The chair turning, me sitting in the middle of the court like a kid sent to the principal's office, the small crowd assembling, edges unstable, bodies never quite overlapping with furniture. Then the sag and the power, then nothing where the chair had been and me standing with my hand out like a man trying to hail a cab in the rain. "I'm quitting," I said, and I meant it the way you mean it when you tell yourself you'll start exercising or stop buying frozen dinners. Dale nodded like he understood I needed to hear myself say it. The next afternoon off shift, out of habit or debt, I drove to the library. The same librarian printed me the one page she'd found and folded it for me, with the strictness of a person who likes her corners to meet. There was a second article attached, a small collection of notes that must have been a retraction or follow-up without a headline. It listed the names of the dead, including the older woman, Lydia Weems. There was a phone number for a nephew who'd left town years back. There was a paragraph, almost a footnote, about fire code changes and an investigation that had found small pre-existing failures in emergency lighting. The word pre-existing read like an apology written by committee. I put the paper in my glove compartment and left it there for weeks. When I finally called the number, a man answered who knew exactly who I was before I said my name. "You're calling from the mall," he said. "You've seen her." I didn't ask how he knew. I had the sense of stepping again into a corridor that existed for those who needed it. He told me she'd been the kind of aunt who ironed handkerchiefs and left cash in Bibles for emergencies, and could never sit all the way through a movie because she worried she'd left the stove on. He told me she'd hated malls, too bright, too cold, too loud. He told me she went once a month anyway to walk and to buy those soft peppermint candies at the kiosk that wrapped them in red cellophane. I went to look for her a week after, he said, to say goodbye, and I saw an old woman in the mirrored column next to the bookstore chewing a peppermint and not moving. And I thought, well, that's my aunt. But I couldn't find her outside the glass. When I got close, she was gone. Maybe it was someone else. I don't go there anymore. I did quit. Not with a slam of the door. With 2 weeks' notice and a handshake and a keep the shirt, which I didn't. The new hires wore black polos with a sharper logo and a motto about safety I've already forgotten. I didn't tell them about the chair, about the crowd, about the napkins or the pennies or the music that learned your pace. I didn't tell them about the way the cameras seemed to rank our reality. When they asked what night was like, I said, quiet, and let them laugh, sometimes late. I drive past Maplewood's lit letters and their new boutiques and the restaurant where everything is artisan. The food court has a different sponsorship now. The Pepsi machine glows a cooler blue. I tell myself the crowd moved on, or else the cameras lost interest. But once at a stoplight, waiting for the arrow to give me permission to turn, my windshield fogged around the edges the way it does when breath catches on glass in winter, and a circle cleared on the inside as if someone had put a fingertip there, gently, as if to make sure the world could still be pushed. Every now and then, a friend asks, "You ever see anything weird on those night shifts?" People love to borrow haunted things the way kids love to borrow trouble. I tell them no because it's easier. And because the thing about surveillance is that it convinces you everything is true and nothing is. And because the old woman, when she spoke, didn't ask to be part of a story. She asked for a way out. Maybe the story is the wrong direction. But if you ever walk a mall after closing, maybe you work there. Maybe you got stuck in a bathroom and the door jammed. Maybe you were a teenager once and know how to wedge yourself behind a kiosk. Do yourself a favor. Don't look too long into the black panes of the shop windows. They are a kind of water that reflects what's on your mind and what isn't. If you see a chair turned a few degrees off square, don't fix it. Leave it. The world has room for a crooked chair, and if an old woman with good posture and a dark dress asks you whether the way out is this way, don't pretend you're a map. Don't make promises the building can't keep. Just walk with her, however long the mall will allow, beneath the skylights and the whispering lights until the air cools and then warms again, then go home. And when the house smells like its own old wood and the refrigerator has that faithful hum, hold your breath and listen. If the glass fogs at the edges and someone's finger draws the smallest circle you've ever seen, you'll know you didn't imagine it. There are places where we're all just faint enough to overlap, and on a monitor somewhere the pixels will decide, for one borrowed minute, that you matter as much as the dead. I got the night shift for the same reasons most folks do. The world is quieter when it's tired, and I've always been better at hearing myself think when the rest of town is asleep. Also, the pay was 50 cents more an hour. And 50 cents more an hour becomes real money when the car note is late, and the fridge hums like a tired animal every time you open it. So I took the graveyard at the big fulfillment warehouse out on County Road 17, the one with the chain-link perimeter and floodlights that make the fog look like it's full of ghosts. I told myself it would be simple work. Boxes come in, boxes go out. You scan the barcodes. You log the exception reports. You swat the occasional moth that mistakes the sodium lamps for the moon and flutters itself stupid against your neck. Nights run on routines. When they don't, nights fall apart. The first thing you learn in a place like that is how the building sounds. The conveyors talk in long, low sighs. The hydraulic docks thump like a heartbeat. A forklift backing up chirps in a way you stop hearing by the end of your second week. And the floor polishers whining 2 aisles over might as well be cicadas in a pecan tree. It's all noise until one night it isn't. And then you notice every absence the way you notice a missing tooth with your tongue. I was 3 months in when I got the Bay 12 rotation. We called that strip the dead row because the bays sat against the fence line where the rail spur used to come in. Triple high racks, a few ratty pallet blankets rolled like old rugs, and a draft that made receipts skitter off clipboards if you didn't keep a palm on the stack. The lit sign over the dock door used to read 12 in bright green numerals, but one of the digits had flickered out so it read $1 for months. The night it went fully dark, somebody taped a paper 12, where the glass had been and the tape browned, at the edges like it had been smoking under the heat lamp. My supervisor on nights was a man named Harlan with a slow walk and a voice like blunt gravel. He had the kind of face you see in newspaper clippings about high school baseball teams. Eyes squinting in summer light, a mouth that never quite figured out where to end a smile, a cap pulled low enough to keep out trouble. He had been at the warehouse since it opened, knew where the concrete had cracked the winter the pipes burst, knew which breakers were fussy, knew who drank from their water bottle and who refilled with Mountain Dew. Bay 12 is your bay. Miles, he told me the night he rotated me over. Chocks the wheels, breaks the seal, checks the manifest. That's it. Keep your head down and don't freewheel the pallet jack on the dock. Slippery there when it sweats. Anything special about 12? I asked, mostly to hear him talk because the cold out there gnawed through the sleeves and I didn't want to be left alone with the sound of my own breath yet. He looked at me for a beat too long. Just that it's drafty, he said. Wear a beanie if you have one. The fog tends to sit on that fence like a fat cat. So I wore a beanie and I stood out there with the dock light shining pale circles on the wet concrete. And I scanned. The first hour is always the worst on nights because you're not tired yet. You haven't earned the ache that makes time slide. You count bolts in the dock plate. You count the holes in the chain link. You count pigeons roosting on the rafters like gray commas hanging in a sentence nobody plans to finish. At 3:15 the first night, I heard a truck back up to Bay 12. I heard the backup siren, the short bursts that say somebody is easing a long body where it doesn't want to go. I heard the cough of air brakes, the steel rattle that means a trailer's settling against a lock. It happens a dozen times a night at other bays. So I didn't think much of it until I realized I hadn't seen any headlights through the fog, hadn't heard the gravel clatter from the access road, hadn't smelled diesel. I walked to the pull chain and rolled up the dock door. The fog breathed into my face the way a dog does when it's too cold to bark. The truck was there. White trailer scabbed with old adhesive ghosts where graphics had peeled away. No cab. Just the trailer nose squared against the dock bumpers like the headless body of a big fish that's still twitching. Hey, I called. Because you call when you're a person alone and you don't like the idea of being the only voice. You need anything? Like I was asking a trailer if it wanted a cup of coffee. Silence answered. Not even the click of cooling metal. Out by the fence, a night bird made a noise like a squeaky hinge and then thought better of it and shut up. I punched the door pin so the dock light came on inside the trailer. The corrugated aluminum floor threw back a dull glow like the throat of an old well. There were boxes in there, sure. There are always boxes, but these were unmarked under the plastic wrap. No UPC, no freight labels, no stenciled warnings about silica gel or lithium batteries, just plain cardboard taped neat, stacked to waist height. There was a handprint smeared on the nearest one, like someone had palmed it in a hurry, and even across the gap I could tell it wasn't modern dirt. It looked like the dust of old books. Manifest, I said because the word settles the nerves. The world is bearable when it names itself the way it's supposed to. No manifest in the sleeve. No bill of lading tucked under the corner strap. The ink pen I kept in my vest pocket clicked loud enough to make me wince. I hit the yard buzzer for a spotter to come line up a cab. No one came. But after a minute, I heard the dock lock clatter and bite, retract, and bite again like it was testing its teeth. I didn't push the trailer seal because there wasn't a seal to break. I threw the plate and walked a pallet jack up into that long aluminum throat and told myself this was still just a job. I didn't open any of the boxes. Not that first night. I moved them to the floor. I stacked them 2 by 2 on a warehouse pallet. I wrapped them with the same wine of plastic film I use for shoes or vacuums or toys. I printed a provisional intake label and wrote unknown in the item field so the system wouldn't spit it back. Unknown looked wrong on the screen. It always does. The computer took it anyway. It doesn't believe in doubt the way people do. When the trailer was empty, I stepped to the mouth and peered left and right at the fence line. The gravel, the fog, no cab, no tire tracks cutting fresh lines in the damp. Just the trailer, like it had always been there and we had been late to notice. By 4, the trailer was gone. I didn't hear it leave. 1 minute it was a shadow against the dock light, and the next the bay gaped open on a view of chain link and floodlights in a fog that played with its own tails. Bay 12's light blinked twice and steadied. When I looked back, the stack of unmarked boxes sat 4 pallets high in Zone 12C, a neat wall of cardboard that nobody would see if they weren't looking for trouble. In the morning, I took the intake sheet to Harlan. He looked at it for a long time and then looked at me longer. No manifest? He said slow. Nope. No bill of lading. Nope. He chewed on the inside of his cheek. All right, he said. Sometimes the third-party freight boys get sloppy. He tucked the sheet into a battered folder he kept in a drawer with his thermos and a pack of breath mints. Put a hold coat on the pallet, awaiting instructions. The next night, at the same time, another trailer nosed up without a cab and lit its bowels for me like a show dog. Same boxes, same plain tape, same dust mat where labels should have been. I loaded them, printed code HOLDA, and tasted metal when I swallowed. Like my mouth had bitten down on an old coin. It went on like that for a week. I started to expect it, the way your body expects a thunderclap after it counts the seconds from lightning. My sleep during the day got light and patchy. In the grocery store in the afternoon, old ladies reaching for cans in the soup aisle made me jump like I'd seen their arms reach through the slats of a crate. At night, when the dock light pooled on the concrete and the fog breathed, I stopped calling out to no one and took to talking under my breath to the boxes themselves. The way you talk to dogs you don't want to startle. Easy, easy, almost done. The third week is when the pattern shifted. The first box I shouldered onto the pallet felt heavier than it looked. There's a weight to shoes, to books, to anything with corners. This was not that. This was the density of something that doesn't like being moved. When I set it down, the sound it made was soft and padded, and my heart did a tiny deer kick in my chest. I told myself I was hearing the cushion of packing peanuts or wool or those air pillows that pop when you step on them. Bay 12's draft worked its fingers through the seams of my jacket. I told myself to quit making things into stories, but the tape was old. New tape laid over old, and at one corner the adhesive had failed, and a wedge of cardboard lifted like a hangnail. I put my thumb on it to press it down, and a smell came up that I have not forgotten and will not forget. A jam jar of attic dust left open in the rain. Old paper, old leather, the tang of metal from a hospital corridor. Beneath it all, the sickly sweet of something that had once been alive and had decided not to be very long ago. I sealed it with a slap of clear tape and told myself I'd imagined the smell. I wrapped the roll around my hand twice and tugged hard, like I could pull a knot tight around a doubt. Don't open 'em, said a voice behind me, close enough that if I'd been a different kind of man, I might have swung on instinct. It was Harlan, standing with his hands buried in his neon vest as if his fingers had gotten lost in there. The light in Bay 12 always made him look jaundiced. His eyes, already pale, were almost white. I wasn't going to, I said, a little too fast. You stomping up quiet like that is how people get a pallet jack through their toe. He smiled without teeth. You're doing fine, he said. Just don't open them. What are they? I asked. It came out harder than I meant. The smell had crawled behind my eyes, he considered. Returns, he said finally. From who? From when? He said. And that is the kind of answer that is only an answer if you refuse to pick it up and shake it. On my break around 4, I poured coffee into a foam cup and sat on the metal stairs that led up to the mezzanine. The steam ghosted, then vanished, then ghosted again like it couldn't make up its mind about being visible. I watched the line for Bay 12 from the corner of my eye, waiting against sense for the trailer to back itself out and scoot away like a slug. When I went back to the dock, it was gone. The pallets I had loaded sat where I'd left them. The garage-style door of 12 hissed down half an inch and then shuddered, like a breath caught. I shut it, locked the bar, and told myself I didn't run my hand along the seam to feel where the cold came through. Small towns talk by nods and grunts, and a man who keeps nights is a man you expect to say less than most. Still, I mentioned Bay 12 in a way that made it sound like a joke, like I was only asking because I was bored. The day guys took the question and set it on the table with snug little smiles. The older women in the break room had the heat and frost hair of women who had seen 3 owners come and go and land on their feet each time. They looked at one another, and then looked at me the way you look at a kid who is testing the fence to see if it's hot. One of them, Loretta, said, "Don't fiddle with the dead's inventory, honey, and the dead won't fiddle with yours." I laughed, but the sound had an empty bowl in the middle. Later that week, I made the mistake of glancing at the camera feed in Harlan's cramped office. He was out checking a battery in a beaver loader, and he left the CCTV monitor humming. All 16 squares flicking between aisles, foyer, doorways, docks. Bay 12 showed its pool of light and its blank floor. Even as 10 feet away, I knew the trailer was sitting there. Light on. Boxes looking back at the light like 100 blind eyes. I tapped the glass and got static snow. The other bays showed what they should. 12 showed absence like it was proud of it. I told myself the camera was busted. A maintenance ticket went in. 2 weeks later, the feed for 12 was still a gray square with a time code sliding through it like a speck on the eye. And then the cries began. They didn't come at once. If anything like that started as a scream, I would have done the smart thing and quit, no matter how late the car note was. They started as the kind of small sounds you hear when you think you're alone and realize you aren't. Somebody clearing their throat in a stall, a cough in an empty aisle, a child panting after running too fast. The first time I heard it, a muffled thrum from inside one of the boxes with the failed tape corner. I froze with my hands on the wrap lever and held my breath until the blood in my ears swallowed everything. It didn't come again that night. The next night it did, and again after, and then it didn't, and then it did twice. You can get used to awful things if you never look them straight in the eye. I told myself the sounds were settling, that the boxes were breathing out after days of being shut. It was a lie, but you don't call a lie a lie when you need it, I kept telling myself those things until I didn't, because there was the night I cut a corner of wrap to tighten it and a Polaroid slid out between the box and the stretch film and touched my boot like a hand. I stooped. I didn't want to. It might have been a trick of the light, but I think the box released a sigh as soon as I relieved it of the photograph. The way a person does when they put down a grocery bag they didn't realize was too heavy. The picture had the chemical sheen of the 70s. A man with a mustache like a magic trick held a little boy by the elbows at the edge of a pond. Ducks blurred in the background as if they were made of smoke. Someone had written Mikey, 5th B-Day on the white margin in neat, careful all-caps pen. The ink was water-blurred in one place, as if someone had pressed a tear onto it and then thought, better of leaving proof. I slid the Polaroid back under the wrap, and it clung to the cardboard like skin. I started to see pieces like that when I didn't mean to. A wide leather belt with the initials GH stamped near the buckle. A hospital bracelet, name scrubbed out by time but room number visible 403. A girl's barrettes in a snap-top plastic case clouded with age. Things that belonged to people. Things I could feel the warmth of if I let my imagination step out of its cage. I told Harlan I was hearing noises. He nodded slowly, the way a man nods when the weather is inevitable. He took a breath. "You ever see the little memorial on the road into town?" he asked. "The white cross with the fake flowers that turns its back to the sun most days?" "I know it," I said. "By the ditch where it dips. The cross that gets a new ribbon every spring." He nodded. "Some things mark where they get taken," he said. "Some things mark where they get found. Some just keep moving and don't slow down when they pass." "You?" "That's not an answer. It's the only one God, I wanted to open a box the way a man Wants to pick at the scab that keeps him from bending his knee. I wanted not to. Both wants pulled in a way that ached my shoulders even when I stood still. The night I decided I would, the fog was thick and the floodlights out there made cones on the air like tallow candles. The dock was quiet. When I picked up the utility knife, my palm was wet and not from the weather. It was an old box from the first night or close to it. Edges softened. Tape yellowed under the clear modern layer I'd put down myself. I set it on the waist-high end of the conveyor so the camera that didn't work could watch me if it wanted. I pressed the blade to the tape seam, and before I cut, I said out loud like an oath, "If there's nothing in here, I'll sleep better. If there is something in here, I'll know, and that's better." It was not better. At first there was nothing, just wadded brown paper that had gone soft with time. That smell of wet attic and old hospital and lilies left too long in a vase. Beneath the paper lay a pair of men's shoes with soles worn down like the men I grew up with wore them. Heels slanted from favoring a leg, toes scuffed. Beneath the shoes lay a sweater that had held onto its shape like a memory you don't dare tell wrong. It was coarse wool, a small tear repaired with a sure hand. Beneath the sweater lay a stack of photographs bound with a rubber band that had turned to gummy tar and left a stain. The top photo was of a summer day. The mustache man and the little boy grinned like they had no other choice. The boy's hair lifted from his forehead like wheat in a light wind. At the very bottom, beneath the pictures, beneath a folded napkin with the name of a diner inked in blue that I recognized and didn't, lay an ID badge in a cracked plastic sleeve, my picture, my name. The badge number I could recite from memory the way a prisoner does his. The photo had been taken the day I started on nights, my hair trying to make decisions it shouldn't and my mouth torn between two expressions. Someone, somewhere, had scuffed the plastic across my eyes and left a white crescent there like a fingernail. I stood there with the knife in my hand and my badge in my other hand, and my badge still on the lanyard around my neck. And the box breathed, not loud, not the way a person breathes, the way air insistently finds a pocket and leaves it. I put the badge back in the box because there was nowhere else to put it. I pressed the pictures down. I laid the shoes as they had been laid. I replaced the paper. I closed the flaps and taped the seam shut with 6 strips like I was angry, and maybe I was. When I looked up, Harlan was there, standing in the bay door with his hands in his vest, his face drawn. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man waiting for a train he can't stop. "Please tell me that was a joke," I said, and the laugh that came with it was the dry flutter of a moth beating the inside of a glass. He shook his head once. "We don't open 'em, Miles." "Why is my badge in there?" I asked. I held up my badge and its lanyard. "Why is it here twice?" "Why are there pictures of people in these boxes?" "Why?" "Because you looked," he said, and the sadness in his voice was worse than anger would have been. "Because you looked and now you're part of the inventory." "You knew," I said. "You knew this was going to happen." He swallowed. In the dock light, his throat worked like a fish. "The first rule of nights is you don't disturb the chain of custody," he said. "That's true of freight. It's true of other things." "Whose custody?" I asked. He looked past me into the trailer. "You ever live with somebody you loved and you kept your coats by the door, and in the dead of winter, you'd both reach for the same one? And because of who you were, one of you let go?" I didn't answer. It wasn't a question, not really. "Some things let go," he said. "Some don't." I wanted to punch him and hug him and shake him, and I didn't do any of those. He stepped forward and laid a soft old man hand on the box, and I swear it went still beneath his palm. "Don't destroy him," he said. "Whatever you do." After he left, I went to the men's room and stared at my face in the mirror and practiced not looking like I was afraid. The fluorescent lights hummed. The stall door, kicked off its hinge months back and rehung poorly, hung crooked in the way my mouth did in the badge photo. I washed my hands twice and they still smelled like wool that had known rain. The thing about a rule you don't understand is that it isn't a rule. It's a dare. The next night and the night after that, I handled the boxes as if they were full of sleeping cats. I told myself I would keep my head down and not look, and the universe would trade me for my obedience. The boxes went to Zone 12C and sat there like a quiet room in a house where somebody is dying upstairs. Bay 12's camera feed continued to show nothing happening nowhere. The trailer continued to back itself up to the bumpers with a shudder and a sigh at 3:15 a.m. The hold on the pallet stayed in place, and the system sent me gently worded emails reminding me that HOLDA items should be escalated only after 7 business days. I deleted the emails and didn't sleep. Some nights, if I stood very still, I could hear a whisper from inside the stacked wall of boxes that sounded almost like a word. Other nights, I heard longer, more human noises that reached right under the sternum and pressed. The smell of lilies came sharp and sudden sometimes, and that was worse than anything. I should have quit. That is the plain truth. I should have said to hell with the 50 cents an hour and the car note and the quiet. I should have told Harlan to reassign me, and his mouth would have made a shape I didn't want to see. But I am not a brave man, and I am not a coward. I am a man who catches himself at the top of stairs thinking about the last step and how easy it would be to take it wrong and let gravity do the rest. I am a man who has lived alone long enough to talk aloud to his kettle when it takes too long to boil. On a Sunday night that was really Monday morning, when the fog hung close enough to kiss, the trailer back to Bay 12 and the dock lock clacked and bit, and I tossed the plate and I walked in with my pallet jack and I stopped. There was a crate in the center, not a box, not cardboard, crate. Weathered pine slats tied with wire, the kind of crate that has apples in old films. There were words stenciled on the side, but the paint had run with time, and all I could make out was a city name I recognized and the number 403, which I did too. I should have turned around. I should have summoned Harlan like he was a conjured thing. Instead, I put the forks under the crate and pried it up and listened to the wood whisper as it shifted. At the underside, through the gap between slats, I saw a hospital bracelet swinging on a string where it had been tied. It flashed like fish. The field for name was blank, a long empty, but room 403 showed clear. The sound the crate made was a sound I didn't know how to talk about. It was not a breath. It was not wood. It was the sound of a rushing in place like wind that can't find its way out of a sealed room. My throat closed down to a straw. I brought the crate into the light. I found the edge of a slat where it had given over time and lifted. The nail that had held it did not protest the way wood does. It slipped away like a loose tooth. I told myself I would look, only look, just for the smallest of seconds because I had to. Because this would keep going if I didn't understand it, and it would keep going if I did. And I needed one of those to feel less foolish than the other. Inside was a long shape wrapped in the yellowed cloth of hospital sheets. The sheet was tied at the places sheets are tied. The shape beneath was not human the way a human is fully a person, but it was not human either. The sternum of the thing rose and fell with the deep patience of sleep. A long thread hung from a thick stitch across what would have been the chest. The stitch had been done with the pragmatic, clumsy urgency of a person who has something to do, and hands that have learned a skill out of necessity. The thread was the color of pennies. The cloth had been inked. Black letters wobbled like a kindergartner's name printed on the first day of school. M-I-L-E-S-I. Didn't scream. Not then, not ever. The sound I made was the silence of a man deciding to keep a secret for the rest of his life. I don't know how long I stood there. The dock light hummed. Outside the bay door, the fog swelled against the chain link and fell back, a slow tide. The thing in the sheet breathed in its long, patient way. I reached out. I don't know why. Maybe because I was as much of the inventory as anything. Don't, said Harlan somewhere above my left shoulder. My hand stopped. I looked up. He was nearer than I'd thought anyone could get without me hearing. His mouth had the shape of a man who had decided not to cry and then learned he had already started. You can't, I began. I know, he said, and put a gentle, heavy hand on my shoulder. I know. Why me? I said finally. Why here? He thought about it. He had the kind of face that thinks honestly. Some places are for sorting, he said. Some are for keeping. Some are for shipping on. Maybe this is all three. Maybe nights are when the accounting gets done because days are sloppy and loud. I won't let it, I said, and I meant it like a boy means it when he tells the sea not to. I know, he said again, and pulled the slat back into place with a tenderness that made my skin prickle. He hammered the nail down with the butt of his flashlight. Please listen to me. If you try to burn it or cut it or dump it, it doesn't stop. It just goes someplace you can't see, and you'll still be on the list. Only then there won't be anyone to see you. Do you understand? I don't. I know, I told him then about the badge. His mouth made that shape again. You saw your badge, he said, because you looked. If you hadn't, the inventory would have stayed numbers. The numbers are kinder. Leave the numbers alone. I didn't sleep at all the next day. I lay on my back and watched the shadow of the ceiling fan blades cross the ceiling like a slow dark clock. When the phone rang at noon, it was my sister. and her voice sounded like the part of home I hadn't moved away from, asking if I was coming to her boys' game Saturday. I told her yes, and then I remembered that the game would be under the lights, and I had promised Harlan I would take overtime that night because 2-day guys had the flu. I told her no. I told her I would make the next one, and we both pretended we believed me. That night my hands shook when I pulled on my gloves. The trailer arrived with the patience of tides. The dock light hummed. Inside, the boxes were smaller, stacked like bricks. I picked one up and it was light, and when I shook it gently, the thing inside moved like dry grain. I cut it open and reached in and came up with a handful of hospital bracelets, the plastic gone cloudy, the name blocks scrubbed blank by someone's thumb. There were 100 of them. 1,000. The room number on each was 403. I closed the flaps. I taped them shut. I stacked the box on the pallet and set another on top and another until the stack was steady and regular, and I could place my palm against it and feel nothing, see nothing, think nothing for 3 breaths. The night after that, the boxes held shoes. The night after that, photographs. The night after that, packets of hair wrapped with ribbon and labeled with the careful penmanship of a nurse from a decade nobody wanted to talk about. All of it came at 3:15. All of it went where I put it. All of it was quiet, if I was. And then there was the night I stood at the mouth of Bay 12 and counted my heartbeats, because I had decided to do something stupid and I knew it. I had gone to the hardware drawer and found the long iron bar we used to pry plates when they stuck, and I had told myself that I would lever the crate open, drag it to the yard, pour something on it that burned hotter than any argument, and watch it go up until there was nothing left of my name stitched across the sheet. I told myself I might die from whatever that meant, but I would not die slowly knowing this thing had me by the red thread of its inventory list. I told myself I would not become a badge. I told Harlan I had a sick stomach and needed a minute, then walked to Bay 12 and put my hand on the chain for the door and pulled it up in one long rattle. The fog looked back at me like an eye filmed over. The trailer waited. It always did. I stepped up into it. Iron bar in my right hand, flashlight in my teeth. The crate sat where crates sit. I wedged the bar into the seam and leaned. A hand caught the end of the bar, not hard, not rough, but firm, as if closing a drawer you've left open. The hand was Harlan's. He had never run in the time I'd known him, but he had gotten here first. "Don't," he said, and the word was a plea. "Please, Harlan," I said. "I can't live with this." "You are living with it," he said quietly, "and you'll keep living with it if you leave it be." "Who told you that?" My voice shook. "Who told you to tell me that? Who told you?" He took the bar from my hand the way a father takes a dangerous toy from a child who doesn't understand the risk. He leaned it against the trailer wall. "When I first came here," he said, "I did what you're thinking. I was younger and angrier and had more to lose, or maybe thought I did. I dragged a crate to the drain and I poured what I had and I lit a match and I watched it burn. The wood went, the sheet went, the thread curled like hair. I thought I'd beaten something, and I went home and I slept and I dreamed of a girl with barrettes lined up on her pillow like soldiers. And when I woke up, my son's room was empty and his closet smelled like lilies. I came into work and there was a box on the plate, just one, and inside was his little league jersey with his name on the back and the stitching torn. I went home and the room was full again, and he looked at me with the old light in his eyes and I didn't burn anything else. That was 23 years back. He's 40 now and he calls me on Sundays. I don't know if it was what I did or what I didn't do. I don't know the rules, Miles. I just know what keeps a person and what turns a person into a picture on a table with a candle beside it. I sat down on the edge of the dock plate because my legs didn't trust me. Harlan put one of his brown hands on the crate like a man calming a skittish horse. The crate breathed. I swear I know how that sounds, but I swear it. The pace of it slowing like a metronome being dragged down by someone's gentle finger. "What are we doing here?" I asked finally. "Processing," he said. "All of us. All the time. I didn't burn the crate. I didn't lever it open. I didn't do anything except stand at Bay 12 each night as the fog thinned and thickened, and the floodlights pulled shadows off the chain link like old bandages. And I moved what came in on the plate into stacks. And I didn't look too hard at anything, and I lived. That's what I did. You can live with a wound if you learn how not to turn your head too fast. For a while that was enough. And then I made the second mistake, the one I'm ashamed of. I wasn't the only one on nights. There's a boy named Val who runs cartons on the beeline now, and then when the day shift leaves things sloppy, there's Maria, who cleans with a purposeful joy that looks like a prayer. There's a guy named Deke who has a laugh like a jackal and calls me Dad, the way kids call any older man that as a joke. They're good people. They are not my family. I told myself that made a difference. Deke liked to talk. He liked to talk in the way people who have been told they are funny like to confirm it. He rolled through Bay 12 once too often with his earbuds half in and his music chirping out a tinny percussion. And he shouldered an unmarked box with a grin and said, "What's in here, old man?" "The Ark of the Covenant?" I told him to leave it. He wrestled it to his chest and staggered, and it thumped against his rib cage in a way that made color leave his face. He set it down. He said, "Jesus," and then he said, "Is that?" And then he looked at me, and I looked at him, and I didn't say anything. "Don't open it," I said at last. "It's hold freight." Deke rolled his eyes and made a noise in his mouth that an older man wouldn't survive making. "Hold freight is code for the day shift screwed up and wants us to fix it." I'll peek. "If it's diamonds, I'll cut you in." He reached for his utility knife. I moved faster than I thought I could. I put my hand on the lid. I said his name. He looked up into my face, and whatever he saw there made him set the knife down like a man setting down a question he's not ready to know the answer to. He laughed too loud. "You're serious," he said. "I am." "Why?" "Because some things are not to be moved," I said. And it sounded like Harlan, and it sounded like my father, and it sounded like a preacher talking to a good man about to do a bad thing. He didn't open it that night. He didn't the next. He made jokes about it in the break room, and the older women didn't laugh, and Loretta offered him a cookie and said, "Don't fiddle with the dead's inventory, honey." And he did that mouth noise again, but it was smaller. On a Wednesday, Deke didn't come back from his smoke at 3. I found his cigarette butt twisted into the crack where the dock plate meets the concrete, and the ember had burned a scar that looked like a comma, waiting for a clause that didn't come. I paged him. I called his phone. It went to voicemail with a bright, thoughtless cheerfulness that made my hands go cold. At 3:15, the trailer backed to Bay 12, the lock bit, the light came on. There was one crate inside, centered, secured with straps. On top of the crate lay a badge lanyard. The badge in the sleeve had a jackal laugh frozen in place. I didn't open the crate. I didn't move. I stood there until my knees shook. I called Harlan, and he walked slow and set his hand on my arm and said, "We don't open them." Then he took the badge and put it in the battered folder where he kept breath mints and forms, and he shut the drawer, and that was that. The official story, because there is always an official story, was that Deke walked off. The job's like that. You blink wrong, you quit. He texted somebody he shouldn't have, they said. He'd be back or he wouldn't. People who work nights for long enough start to feel like they've been drafted. Sometimes they dodge the war. This is how we talk around holes. I didn't open a crate after that. I didn't cut a box. I didn't so much as peel a corner of tape to press it down. The cries came and went. The smells rose and fell. The camera for Bay 12 kept showing nothing at all. Time code like a fish at the top of a pond. The stacks in Zone 12C grew until we started a new zone, 12D, and after that 12E, and the system stopped sending polite reminders and began sending red exclamation points. Harlan took the notices and tucked them in his folder and ate another mint and looked at me with eyes that had decided to get old without asking his permission. It was raining the night my sister called again. "You missed 2 games now," she said, and I could hear the weight in her voice that people put there when disappointment is love in disguise. "You okay, Miles?" "I'm fine," I lied. "Overtime. You sound tired." "I am." The truth, I was listening with half my ear to the wall of boxes, and tonight the sound was not a cry but a hum, a low, steady hum like an elevator stuck between floors with the motor still running. "You should come over Sunday," she said. "I'll make those noodles you like." "Yeah," I said. "Yeah." "You sound far away," she said. "I am." I didn't say from what or from where. That Sunday I slept like a stone in a river. The river moved around me and I didn't. I dreamed of my badge in a box and my hand reaching in to take it and finding not my badge but my throat. I woke with the afternoon light slicing my room into strips. I went to my sister's and ate noodles, and I laughed when my nephew spilled his water, and I helped him sop it with paper towels, and I put my hand on his head. It felt like the top of the crate. I took my hand away and asked if he wanted to play checkers. I would like to tell you that I quit after that. I didn't. I would like to tell you that I fought and won. I didn't do that either. This is not a story where a man goes out into the fog and yells at it until it runs away. This is a story where the fog takes your measure and decides how tall your shadow is, and you learn to live under it. The last night I'm going to tell you about, the night that feels like a last, even if it wasn't, came in late fall. The air hurt in that clean way it hurts when something big has moved through it and left only cold behind. The floodlights carved the fog into pieces like meat. I was at Bay 12 when the backup siren bleated once and then stopped as if it had been shushed. The trailer came in soft as anything. I pulled the chain. The door rattled up. No crate, no boxes stacked. Just a single cardboard square in the middle of the bay plate, taped neat. No labels. The seams aligned as if a very patient person had run their thumbnail along each one until it lay as it should. I picked it up. It weighed exactly what it should weigh for a box that size. When I brought it to the light and set it down, I saw that someone had written in pencil on the top. The letters small and cramped like they were embarrassed to be seen. The word was return. I cut it open. I did it without thinking. The way you open your own door in the dark and trust the memory of your hand to find the knob. Inside was a wool sweater. Coarse. A tear repaired with a sure hand. Under the sweater, a Polaroid. The mustache man and the little boy at the pond. Ducks like smoke. On the white border in blue ink blurred by time and thumb. Mikey, 5th B-Day. Beneath the photo, an ID badge and a cracked sleeve. My picture, my name, the scuff across the eyes, and at the very bottom, folded once, a paper that had been a shipping manifest once upon a prettier world. The company logo at the top was the old one, the name of the place back when money ran through the town like warm syrup. The destination field read, Bay 12, after which someone had penned in small steady letters, miles, clear. I held that word in my eyes until the letters blurred. I put the sweater on. It was too big in a way that felt like a hug, even if I don't like that word. I put the Polaroid in my pocket. I left the badge in the box. I didn't know what clear meant, and I still don't, not exactly. The next night at 3:15, the trailer came, and the night after that, and the night after, and I did my job. The hum in the wall of boxes changed, that's all I can say. It became, if not friendly, then less like a stranger's house after dark. I asked Harlan what clear meant, and he shrugged like a man whose shoulders have carried many words without learning to love them. Maybe it means what it says, he said. Maybe it means what it has to. Maybe it shifts, so I'm okay, I asked, and I heard the child in the question and couldn't do anything about him. He considered. You're here, he said. Sometimes that's the answer. I still think about Deke. I still think about the crate with my name stitched on it and if it's still there or if it ships when I'm not watching. I think about the word, return, and whether that's the same thing as forgiveness. I keep the sweater folded on my chair by the door. When the heat cuts out and the wind finds a gap by the window, I put it on and feel the wool scratch at my wrists, and I don't mind. When I drive home, sometimes I take the road by the memorial with the cross and the fake flowers that turn their backs to the sun. I roll my window down even when it's cold and I smell lilies, and I think of Bay 12 and I think of the fog, and I think of the way the dock light hums. I park and I go in and I make coffee and I say out loud, to the kettle, to the wall, to the quiet, I am here. The other night, late, I woke from a deep, good sleep because something had paused in the world, something big enough to jar me into knowing. I lay there and listened. The fridge hummed, the fan ticked. My own breath rose and fell. And beneath, those domestic noises, a sound like a truck backing up far away, answering itself in short bursts and then quiet. I thought of floodlights carving the fog and the dock lock biting, testing its teeth, and the way absence can be loud when it wants to be. I thought of how long I had left on the car note, and how the warehouse would be there whether I was or not. I closed my eyes. I slept again. I dreamed I was standing by a pond. Ducks smudged the water with the shapes of their bodies. A man stood a few feet off, and we didn't look at one another, and we didn't need to. A little boy with hair that wouldn't lie flat through bread and laughed and turned and shouted something I couldn't hear. The light lay on the water like a hand. I woke up not afraid. Maybe that's all this is. A place where the things we lose pass through to some place we don't get to know about, and some nights we carry them to the threshold and set them down. And they go on without us, and some nights we carry them and find out we were what needed carrying. Maybe the warehouse is just a room where we take turns being the box and the man who lifts it. Maybe the fog keeps secrets because the world needs one or two places where not knowing doesn't kill us. I don't open the boxes anymore. I don't have to. I can feel what's in them the way you can tell a rain is coming by the smell. I load them. I wrap them. I stack them. I nod to the hum the way you nod to a neighbor you don't know but see every day. I stand at bay 12 when the night breathes and the clock slides across 3:15. Sometimes I think I hear a voice from inside a crate saying my name like a question, and I answer it with my hand, laid flat on the wood, and the breathing slows. If you come by the warehouse, you won't see any of this. You'll see floodlights and chain link in a big building that looks like every other big building. You'll smell oil on wet concrete. You'll hear the conveyors and the forklifts and the chatter of people who think they are only moving objects from one place to another. But if you stand at bay 12 at the edge of morning and close your eyes, you might hear a sound like a slow heart, and you might understand just for that moment that the world keeps its accounts at night, and all of us have a line somewhere in a ledger that gets tallied and carried and sometimes cleared. I won't tell you not to look, I won't tell you to. If you do, you'll see what you see. If you don't, you'll still be moved along. Either way, the dock light will hum. The fog will lean its face on the fence like a tired cat. The truck will back up without a driver at 3:15 and set itself gently where it belongs, and I will be there, hands in my pockets until the cold makes me pull them out, breathing in time with a room that never runs out of breath. I didn't plan on working nights. I didn't plan on doing much of anything in August besides counting down graduation, but life doesn't care about your color-coded planner. My mother's transmission blew out on a Sunday, and by Tuesday I was tying the half apron with the red stripe that meant waitress at the Road 89 diner. Everybody in town knew the place. Pie like somebody's aunt made it, coffee like motor oil, a neon sign that buzzed the same note as the hydrant across the lot. It sat by itself where the interstate yawned and then forgot itself. A glass box full of chrome and sugar packets and other people's small plans. Day shift was a parade. Road crews, families with sunscreen still drying on their shoulders. Men who work with their hands and ate like they meant it. Night shift was the world you only see if you agree to live in the margins. My training shift ended at 10, and it was supposed to stay that way. But on my third week, Loretta, who'd been there since the 80s, broke her wrist trying to carry 3 plates stacked like a circus act, and I got asked to cover nights just until she's back, which everyone said with the same look you give a kid when you've told a fairy tale that's going to have teeth. Frank, the owner, had a rules sheet taped behind the register. Most of it was normal. Wash hands, don't mouth off to customers. No eating from the pie case, except for the line in the center and a different typeface that said, at 2 a.m., fresh coffee for the regulars. Serve their booth, do not delay. He had underlined, do not. He had underlined it so many times the paper was soft there. I told myself I could do anything for 2 weeks. I had that dumb optimism, the kind you get when you're 17 and the air tastes like rubber on a hot road. The first night I brought a paperback with a bend in the middle where it had lived in my backpack, and I thought I'd hide it under the register and read between orders. By midnight I'd learned 2 things. The griddle hum is like a lullaby and the light over the corner booth flickers every 12 minutes exactly. I timed it. The radio in the kitchen caught the same station every night, and if you turned it just so with the tip of your fingernail, you could make a baseball game from somewhere 2 states away come in. Like ghosts practicing their lines, I got to know the regulars of the regular kind. There was the pair from the farm co-op who always split a club sandwich and argued gentle as cats about weather models. There was a nursing student named Bree with a backpack that had more highlighters than books and a laugh that came out like a hiccup. There was the highway patrol guy who never took off his sunglasses, even inside at night, and who said he was cutting back on sugar, then ate 3 lemon bars in thin, embarrassed bites. In the first week, the only strange thing I noticed was how the chrome behind the counter made the place look like it had doubled itself. A second diner in the metal, cleaner and flatter and less interested in me. Frank took the 2 a.m. rule seriously. He checked the clock on the register and tapped it if the minute hand stuttered. That booth is theirs, he said, nodding toward the one under the flickering light. You'll know. I asked once because you can't help it if I should make a fresh pot or if the half-full one on the burner would do. His face changed like someone had pulled a bead curtain, and you could see the room behind it. Fresh, he said, and the word had weight. Hot. Serve it yourself, no jokes. No chit-chat. Clockwise. If you have a cold or a cut, I'll pour. He said it light like it was a joke, and then he looked at the coffee machine like it was a man who owed him an apology. Them didn't show the first night. I did the good luck thing you do when you're waiting on a storm and set the cups anyway. White ceramic, little hairline cracks in the glaze like veins. I brought the sugar caddies and the little paler-than-milk creamer pitchers and lined everything up, so it would look nice in a magazine nobody reads anymore. 2 came and went. The minute hand clicked. The light over the booth went through its shutter and steadied. The highway got quiet in that dead hour when the drunks have already made their choices, and the early birds haven't yet put on their shoes. I wiped the chrome with a towel that left a citrus smell like pretend sunshine. The second night, they came. You can tell the difference between a convoy and a beginning of shift rush by the way the light changes. Trucks are their own weather. The windows shook in their frames before the sound arrived. A low thrumming that moved up through the floor and into your knees. Headlights swept the front glass in white bars. Out of the fog came 3 long noses, same make, same color. The paint a plain corporate blue that's supposed to look friendly, but only manages to look empty. They didn't angle in haphazard like hungry people do. They nested into the slots like pieces clicked into a machine. The doors opened and the men got out. Truckers, you'd have said if you were trying to be normal about it. Work boots, jackets with company patches, ball caps. The tired, plantless looks of men who live without greenery. But there was something wrong with the air around them. Do you know the smell of old coins? That coppery tang that sticks to your tongue? It came with them in a thin, cold waft. It rode in under the bell on the door like a thought you'd had before. They didn't take a table like human people pick a table. They filed to the reserved booth like they had a string around their waist and somebody was pulling. They sat with their backs to the glass and their faces to the room. No one spoke. Their hats stayed on. Their faces were pale, not soda fountain pale or sick day pale, but winter under the skin, the blood tucked too far away. The lobby bell was still ringing its last bright ding when Frank's hand hit the coffee machine, and the fresh ground smell rolled out like a promise you'd better keep. He made the first 2 pours, which I learned later was his way to show me exactly how to do it. 1 steady stream, no slosh, no trips. Fill only to the little ridge, never to the brim. Serve clockwise. Sugar and cream within reach. Napkin tucked under the handle like a gift. He stepped back and nodded at me and I did the rest, hands steady because I told them to be. You fellas doing all right tonight? I said, neutral as milk. I heard Frank inhale behind me. The one on the end, call him Lead because that's what he felt like, lifted his face and looked at me. He didn't blink. Up close, his skin wasn't just pale. It was thin, a sheet stretched over the idea of a face. His eyes were pale too, the irises washed out lake water. If he'd been handsome in life, whatever he was now had rubbed the edges off. Coffee, he said, and the word didn't feel like a request so much as a category. The others didn't speak. The bell on the door stilled. Out in the night, a truck door thudded shut without a person attached to it. I stepped back like Frank had taught. The men folded their hands on the table the way my grandfather used to before grace. They sat like that. They didn't touch the cups. They didn't look at one another. After a while, I realized I'd been holding my breath and let it out slow, the way you let out air when you're trying not to blow birthday candles. You don't have to stand right there, Frank said out of the corner of his mouth. You don't have to stand anywhere, just keep things as they are. I went back behind the counter. The chrome showed me a second me, the brave one with good posture and no chickenpox scars. When the men lifted their hands, I watched the reflection because I didn't want to watch them. 2 lifted in that slow synchronized drag like their elbows were heavy, fingers curled around cups. They didn't drink. They just held the heat that wasn't really heat because the air around them seemed colder for it. The kitchen clock clicked. The radio fizzled, then steadied. Bree, the nursing student, came in on the end of her break, laces untied, hair in a pencil bun. She stopped with 1 foot inside the door and 1 out. Oh, she said, and then didn't say anything else. I poured her a coffee in a to-go paper cup without asking. She paid with a handful of coins that felt oddly warm in my palm, like they'd been in a pocket close to skin. She didn't look toward the booth as she left. They sat for 19 minutes. I know because I watched the clock like I watch a spider on the ceiling. Attentive, fascinated, prepared to flinch. At exactly 19, lead unfolded from the booth. The others followed. They didn't push the cups away. They stood up together, the scrape of their boots against the tile soft and even. As they passed the counter, I couldn't help it. I looked. In the chrome strip that runs under the pie case where you can see people's shoes, their reflections lagged a fraction, like the metal was remembering instead of showing. They left nothing on the table. No coins, no checks. That was normal here. Frank always comped the regulars. Still, I expected some acknowledgement. A nod, a wink, the kind of nothing that says thank you with a little air behind it. They gave me the kind of nothing that says you do not exist. The bell didn't ring when they opened the door. The bell didn't ring when it closed. When the taillights disappeared into the fog, Frank let his shoulders drop like a man who'd been holding up a beam by himself and finally got to rest. Fine, he said, not quite to me. Fine then. He took the cups himself and walked them to the sink like they were something that could spill a story you didn't want told. He washed them with the yellow gloves he always made fun of anyone else for using. He dried them with a towel he kept on a separate hook. I polished the counter like a good soldier. The chrome threw back my face and the face of the dessert case and the stacked slices of key lime pie like wedges of lake. The reflection always made the place look cleaner. I was chasing a line of smudges near the napkin dispenser when my wrist bumped the water glass I'd forgotten I'd set there. It slid, light as a thing that wants to fall, and tipped over the side. I caught it. The water caught me. It slobbered down my sleeve to my elbow. Some hit the chrome strip, and that's when I saw it. There are reflections that are just reflections. There are reflections that act like doors that are welded shut. And then there are the ones that give like a cheap screen. I had always thought the counter gave back a little extra, an extra shine, an extra stillness. That night it gave back something that wasn't there. In the thin, watery layer in the distorted band where the world went metal, the men over at the booth had faces, and not their faces. Nobody's face. A row of leering grins without skin, no lips, no cheeks, no sorrow. Teeth like chalk, long and human and wrong. The eye sockets were big, patient pits. Where there should have been noses, there were empty holes. No hats, no hair. The hands wrapped around the cups were bone. Not rough knuckles and callous, but articulated, yellowed. Beautiful in the way a museum case is beautiful at noon and a nightmare at 3 a.m. I jerked my arm back, splashed my shirt, and the picture blurred and became just chrome again. The regular, honest lie. My heart did the old dancer's kick. I looked at Frank because I needed a witness. He was looking at the sink. The radio played a song about trucks leaving in the rain, and the singer sounded like he'd never seen a truck or rain. I told myself I was tired. Tired makes things look like other things. That's science. I made my way back to the booth with a wet towel to wipe, in case the way you clean a thing can persuade the world to be ordinary. Lead's eyes moved like a clock hand. Up close, the cold coin smell was stronger. It rode under the grease and the sugar, a thin salt note. I wiped the table next to theirs with care like a woman wiping a grave she doesn't believe in. Someone at the end of the line turned his cup a fraction. The seam in the chrome looked for a heartbeat like it was breathing. "Honey," Frank said, "give it a rest." They left at 19 minutes again. The truck slid out in the same neat curve. When the last taillight went away, Frank took the closed sign that nobody actually believes at a diner and hung it on the door for 10 minutes anyway. He poured himself something from the little brown bottle he kept under the counter and didn't offer me any. When he saw me looking at the bottle, he said, "It's medicine," in a tone that said it wasn't. "Who are they?" I asked. He rubbed his eyes under his glasses with the heel of his hand. "Regulars," he said, and then he laughed at his own joke, but it sounded like something stuck in his throat. "Been coming as long as I've had the place. Before that, from what Sally told me. Before that, from what Gus told her. That booth's their booth. Coffee at 2. Easiest thing in the world to do right and the worst thing in the world to get wrong." "What happens if you get it wrong?" I asked, because when you're young you think knowledge is armor when mostly it's extra weight in your pockets. He shook his head. "We don't. Not anymore. Anymore." He put the bottle away. "Go wipe down the pie case again," he said. "Do the cinnamon shakers. We'll need something to do with our hands. There's a trick the world does where it changes the subject without changing the subject. I fell into it that night and told myself it was fine. There were explanations that didn't need explaining. There were facts you could stand on like stones across a stream. It was just coffee, just men, just a booth that flickered. The chrome was just chrome, pretending it was a mirror. People get pale when they don't sleep. People go quiet when the road eats their words. The third night, the fog came in thicker, a whole other world breathing against the glass. It swallowed the sign. It made the parking lot into a suggestion. If a movie had been filming, you would have said the fog machine operator overdid it. The hum of the light grew a second line like a harmony. The bell at the door was a little slow to ring, like it had to think about it. The convoy came a minute early, which is not a big deal unless you are living your life in a way that depends on hands of a clock being where they are supposed to be. Frank checked the register twice and hit the side with his knuckles like he could make the minute go back where it belonged. He had me brew the fresh pot 10 minutes early, then stand and wait with the carafe as if it were a candle at a vigil. The men came in colder. I felt it on my wrist bones. They sat, we poured. It would have been funny if it wasn't what it was, a ceremony like serving good china to people who don't eat. The floor under the booth looked darker, as if the shadows had pooled there. This time when I went back to the counter, I did a bad thing. I took a half step closer to the chrome and looked on purpose. The chrome had a seam. I had never noticed it. It ran like a scar down the length of the counter, a hair's breadth thick. On our side of the seam, me and my brave-faced reflection stood in the light. On the other side, in the thinner silver, the diner sat in another light altogether. It was a flatter light like a winter Sunday. The tables were there, but empty. The booth was filled and not filled. When the men lifted their hands, the hands on the other side lifted late, like learning a dance. When I leaned in, the metal sighed. The water pitcher at my elbow sweated and slid. I grabbed it. The motion knocked my hip into the tip jar. Dollars flared like fish in a flick. Coins danced and rolled. 1 quarter snaked to the edge and would have fallen if I hadn't caught it between 2 fingers. It was warm. It had a nick across Washington's temple. For no reason, the nick made me sad. I bent to gather the coins, and that's when I saw lead looking at me in the counter's band of false horizon. The skeletal face tugged itself just enough to give me the feeling of a smile, though nothing as kind as lips moved. Something clever passed through the empty sockets. Not pleasure, recognition. It lasted less than the life of a blink. When I straightened, the real face was the pale calm of an unfinished sky. Frank pretended not to notice my hands shaking. He flipped a burger for no one. He said the line cooks in summer used to salt eggplant outside to keep the kitchen cool, which wasn't true because we didn't serve eggplant. But it was the kind of story you tell when you're laying tracks over a soft part of ground. When the men left, I realized I'd been pressing the quarter into my palm hard enough to leave the circle like a brand. Loretta called the next afternoon to say her wrist needed surgery. Frank held the phone away from his face and winced at the sound of her voice. When he hung up, he picked up the yellow gloves and then set them down. "You all right for the next few?" he asked me, and I heard him say what he wasn't saying, which was, "We're short and I can't ask anyone else, and you're good, kid. You're too good." I said yes, because saying yes is how you get seen. Also because we needed the money and my mother had written the cost of the transmission on the grocery list, like it was a new kind of fruit, and I was stupid enough to look at the number like it had flavor. I started sleeping late and waking when the day had that thin, tired quality that means it's been up before you and is waiting to hand off the baton. I learned how to tie my hair so the grease smell wouldn't stay. I learned not to scratch at the little despair that comes when you're the only one standing under fluorescent lights at midnight, while the back of the world breathes fog up against the glass. I got used to the men in the booth the way you get used to a mole on your arm. You know what it is, you decide it's benign, you let it stay. Then I spilled the coffee. It was nothing. It was a little thing. I'd done the pour like always, clockwise, steady. The small talk version of a pour, and my foot found nothing under it where I expected one tile, because the tile is loose there. Because I learned the floor in squares and carried it in my bones. The carafe hiccuped. A brown line settled on the table between Lead and the man to his right. It didn't hit their hands. It didn't touch their cups. You could have called it nothing if nothing hadn't been the rule. Time did a note bend. The radio lost the station and grew a soft white sound that had the shape of music, but none of the comfort. Frank's breath in the kitchen made a noise I'd never heard a person make. Lade lifted his head, and for the first time his eyes had something in them besides winter. He looked at the spill. The man to his right turned his cup once, slowly. The sound clipped into the silence like cutting a coupon. "I'm sorry," I said. And I was. In that real way you're sorry when you drop a plate that's family and you can't just sweep it into the trash. I reached to wipe the line. Lee's hand moved. I don't know how to say this without it sounding like something the internet would write, but his hand moved into two places at once. In the regular air it rose off the table, the workman's hand, pale, slow. In the chrome the bones lifted first, elegant like the pictures in the biology book. The two were out of sync by less than a blink, and it made my heart buck. Frank came out with a towel he had no business having handy. He set it on the spill like you set a blanket over a sleeping child without touching them. He didn't rub. He only placed and lifted. The coffee was gone into it with a sigh that sounded like a yes. "It's fine," Frank said, and his voice was a tiny actor pretending to be a strong man. Lead watched him. The others didn't move. At the far end of the booth, a hat had the shape of a head under it until you looked hard and saw it didn't. Not really. The bell didn't ring when the door opened for the ordinary courier who came in sometimes for a pie to take to the night guard at the mill. He stepped inside and shivered like he'd just walked into a lake. He stood very still looking at the booth, then said, "You know what, I'll come back," and left without the bell ringing either. They stayed 22 minutes that night. When they left, the fog came with them, sucked out like it had been waiting obediently by the door. The radio found the station again and the song was the same one, starting like a loop had been closed. Frank wrung the towel with both hands over the sink. His rings cut little moons in his fingers. "I'm fired," I said, "because sometimes you say a thing to see if it's the worst thing and to be done with it." He shook his head. "No," he said. "Just careful. Just, particular." He didn't look at me when he said it. "We get these little chances," he added to the air. "We get these little chances to be particular." Bree came in on her 15 without the laugh. She leaned on the counter and looked at my hands, not my face, which was a kindness. "You ever hear about the wreck?" she said softly, as if she was telling me where the good vending machine is. "Up on the 90-mile marker by the bend where the fog gets dumb. My uncle worked the wrecker that night," said. A line of reefers went through guardrail like a zipper. Mist hung in the air afterward for a week. Folks said it was the coolant. My grandma said it was breath. My uncle was quiet for a month. He didn't like pie for a year.
Can you imagine not liking pie?
She sipped and made a face. "Burned the coffee tonight." Or it burned itself. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions that were all the same question, which was what happens to me. But the thing about questions is that they turn into obligations once you know the answers. I sorted sugar packets. I wiped the counter with my careful hands and didn't look too long at the metal's thin otherworld. At 4 a.m., a bird hit the glass with a thud that lifted the skin of my arms into goose flesh. I stepped outside and found a small gray feather stuck to the wetted corner of the window. I put it under the register because it felt like a debt I didn't know yet how to pay. Night stack. They become like plates you've washed 100 times. The chips with your eyes closed. 2 o'clock became a church service. The convoy came. The men sat. We poured, they held. We stood. The seam in the chrome doubled, then doubled again, like a crack in ice traveling. Each night it seemed closer to my side by a nothing that still counted. When nobody else was there, I pressed my thumbnail to the seam and pushed. The metal gave as if the breath on the other side was warm, and the skin between our worlds was thin as the web between thumb and finger. It is a funny thing. The hunger to see what you should not. It eats the caution first. It chews through wisdom next. It leaves you with neat piles of reasons you can stack next to the one you are going to do anyway. Mine was simple. If I could understand it, I thought it would be less. Names shrink things. I planned something stupid. I didn't ask permission because asking would have made it real, and I wasn't ready for real. On a Thursday, when the fog felt warmer than other nights, I wore a cardigan with pearl buttons that used to be my mother's and tucked my hair into the collar because it made me feel contained. I took the fresh pot off the machine at 1:58. I set the cups. I took a breath that felt like breaking the surface of a pool. When the men came in, I poured like normal. The way you do when you're acting so well it's almost true. At the end of the circle, I paused, the carafe a black weight in my hand. "Heads or tails?" I asked the counter, because jokes keep you human. I flipped the quarter. It hit the chrome with a coin's delighted sound. It spun. It made a coin's bright circle. It should have wobbled and fallen, and I should have caught it and made a small joke about luck. It did none of that. It skated to the seam as if drawn. It hesitated, a heartbeat, and then with a sound like sucking the last sweet from between your teeth. It passed through into the other side and lay there in the flat light, tail up. I do not know what I would have done if I had had time to do anything. The world did that television thing where the speakers fluff. The fog outside held perfectly still, like a fabric someone has draped and will not let move. Leeds' hat tipped a degree back, which is nothing, which is everything. His pale hand came down on the table and stayed. "Careful," Frank said too loud. "Careful." And the word rang like he had said a word from a language nobody in the room spoke anymore, but the room remembered. I bent, because that is who I am. I bent to retrieve what I had lost. My fingers found the seam, and the seam found me. The metal was skin-warm. The other side smelled like air that had never seen June. My thumb slid and my nail caught, and in the reflection, the girl who was not me and was me to the marrow leaned in harder, eyes wide, mouth set stubborn, a mirror of my own. And for a hot, dumb, slick second I thought, she wants me to come through. Then Frank's hands closed on my shoulders and hauled me back like I was a kid stepping off the curb into a truck lane. The breath I had been holding ripped out of me. The spell snapped like a scrunchie. The coin on the other side lay flat, unreachable. Dear as a childhood, you think you'd do better if you got another go. Leeds' head settled the degree down again. The others resumed their stillness. The radio picked up a baseball game from 3 towns over, as if the announcer had been paused mid-word for 5 long minutes and then released. Frank didn't yell. He was smart enough not to give the room any more story than it already had. He made a fresh pot with his back to me and said, "That's enough." It meant everything. When the men left, they left slower. The bell rang once, a thin, shy tring that sounded embarrassed to be included. The trucks idled long enough to fog the glass with exhaust that wasn't quite exhaust. When they were gone, the fog stuck around like a guest who doesn't know how to leave. Frank folded his glasses, put them on the counter, then put them back on like he wanted the ritual of it. "Sally's daughter," he said. And I realized that when he said Sally, he meant the woman who'd had the place before him, the one who kept a jar of pickled eggs under the register to teach kids not to steal. She tried something. In 97? Or 8, it was winter, roads iced over. The rumble strip sang all night. Girl had a streak like a comet, the kind that burns bright and makes you feel like something new is possible. She poured late, or she poured early, or she asked them a question. Nobody agrees on the details. But we agree on this. The next week we had a new girl no one remembered hiring, and every time the light flickered, the chrome showed her smiling with her teeth too clean. I thought of the quarter sitting heads up in that flat winter light. I thought of the women who say it seemed polite to follow, and then wake in a county they don't remember crossing into. "You could close," I said. "Lock the door. Put up a sign and go to Florida. Sell retirement condos. Something." I sounded like a kid and I knew it. He looked at me with an expression I had seen older men give their trucks, that mix of love and fury. "Some places aren't ours to close," he said. "You know that. Your house is probably one. Your school. The river. This table." He knocked lightly on the counter near the seam. "Besides, it doesn't help. They don't care about doors. They come whether we're open or not. We do the only thing that makes it nicer." "Nicer?" "We pour coffee." I don't remember sleeping that day. I remember lying on my back and tracing the seam in the ceiling with my eyes and thinking how the cracks in houses draw maps of where you're going. I put the gray bird feather under my pillow like a kid with a tooth. I woke to the wide evening and felt like the day had taken something I wasn't getting back, even though I had nothing much worth stealing. At 1:30, I brewed the pot. I used the good filter, the one that didn't bend. I set the cups and the napkins and the sugar and the cream. I tied my apron tighter than usual, the way you hang on to yourself in a storm. I told myself I would be particular, like Frank said. I would be exact, and exactness was a kind of prayer. At 1:59, the bell rang, and it wasn't the right bell. It was thinner and meaner. It sounded like the bell you ring at a counter nobody ever comes to. The men didn't file in neat. They came in as if the lot had shifted. Leeds' hat sat wrong, too high on his head like a child had put it on a mannequin. The cold coin smell walked ahead of them. The room breathed in. We poured. Lead lifted his hand, then lowered it, then lifted it again like the choreography had changed and he was trying to remember it on stage. The seam in the chrome thrummed like a note you can feel in the walls. The bell above the door jingled because a moth had found it. Outside, thunder stumbled around far-off hills and didn't get nearer. The man at the far end looked up. He was nobody I'd seen before, which was funny because they were always the same. His face had a scar that belonged to a life, not to a myth. A crescent pulled tight at his jawline like a stitch. His eyes were not pale. They were brown and tired and human. For a second, the two worlds mislaid one another, and I could see the before and the after both. He looked at me like you look at somebody when you want to ask for a favor and you're scared to. My body did this thing where the heart reaches before the brain writes a reason. It didn't matter if the men were dead. It didn't matter if the chrome was a joke God was telling and we were the only ones not laughing. There was a person at the end of the booth long enough to look at me the way people look. "Please," he said. A whisper you could file under sound if you needed to put it somewhere. "Please." And the syllable was the same in every language. In the metal, the skull smiled wider, delighted as dogs. In my apron, my hand found the feather. It was a stupid thing to clutch. It was mine. I poured him a second cup, which has never been allowed at 2 a.m. There's one pour. There's 19 minutes. There's leave. But rules are the bones of a thing, and sometimes you want to see if the flesh can survive without them. The liquid opaled as it fell. The cup filled to the ridge, and I lifted it just before it could crown. The man's fingertips brushed mine. They were warm. The room made a small sound like a deer coughing. Lead turned his head slowly as a clock, and I saw the effort in it like something lifting out of mud. "Careful," Frank said, which had turned into the only word he knew in this place. He made the sign of the cross without realizing it. He isn't Catholic. The moth rang the bell again. The brown-eyed man's mouth shaped a thank you, but he didn't say it. He lifted the cup. In the chrome, the bones lifted too, late, elegant, celebratory. The man drank. It was nothing. It was everything. It was swallowing and not choking, and the swallow made the world kick. The fog outside collapsed like a tent thrown down. For one bold, slick second, every light in the diner burned too bright. The seam yawned without moving, more in agreement than emotion, and the air on the other side breathed green like cut grass. Lead made a sound that wasn't a word. The brown-eyed man blinked, and his eyes turned the pale of lake water. He set the cup down. His hands folded on the table like a man waiting for a verdict he already knows. They left at 19 minutes again. The bell rang once, perfect. The trucks wheeled out tidy as if nothing had happened in any of the places in the air. The moth died on the sill, little folded lemon of a body, and I found a grief for it. I didn't know where to set down. Bree came in later with damp hair and said she'd dreamed she'd been waiting on someone in a lime green raincoat who would never decide whether to order pancakes or waffles, and every time she asked, the menu changed. She looked at me like she could smell the smoke of a match I had blown out. "You good?" she asked. I said sure, because sure is what you say when you want someone to leave you alone but also not leave the room. At 5 a.m., when the fields were the color of a bruise fading, and birds like pencil marks started to scribble at the edge of hearing, I took the towel to the chrome and wiped the place where the coin had gone through. I didn't expect to get the coin back. I didn't deserve to. But the metal hummed in a way that made my fingers numb. I pressed the tip of the feather into the seam because I could not help making an offering. The seam took it with the tiniest pop. I felt my mouth curve and then go still. The next night, the convoy didn't come. At 2:10, Frank stood with both hands on the counter like a man at a railing watching the sea. "Sometimes they skip," he said to nobody. "Sometimes they're early. Sometimes late." He lifted his glasses and wept once silently without mess, which scared me more than anything. At 3 a.m., a single long-haul flatbed moved slowly past the lot without turning in, and I flinched like a dog. The bell hung quiet. The lights hummed the same note they always did, and I realized it had been years since the bulbs had been changed. On Sunday after church, my mother made roast in the crock and said things like, "How are your nights, and that Frank seems decent, and do you want me to roll quarters?" She has the softest hands and the budget math of a magician. I think she thought I was tired, the way kids are tired. I wanted to tell her about the coin and the feather and how there are some rules so deep nobody wrote them down. But your bones know them anyway. I asked for more potatoes and said work is work and we're lucky to have it. If a story is a bird, I kept mine in my chest where it battered around until it remembered how to fold its wings. Monday, they returned. The trucks made their straight-edged turn. The bell did its one polite note. The cold air sliced in. Lead sat in his place, and the brown-eyed man with the scar sat at the end, and his eyes were pale now, the human color rinsed out. I don't know why I had expected anything else. Maybe I wanted reward to be proportionate. Maybe I wanted to believe that rules run both ways, I poured. The carafe grew lighter and I could tell the exact moment when it was 3/4, the way you can tell when a song is going to end without looking. As I moved to set it back on the burner, the chrome gleamed brighter then dulled. The seam shifted. It moved sideways past the napkin rack under the register, toward the end of the counter where late-night kids sometimes sit and pretend coffee is cool. It slid like a snake under dust. This was new. And if there is one thing this story has taught me, new is how old things announce themselves. Frank, I said, like a question and the word careful wrapped up together. He looked at the metal the way you look at a chest x-ray when you can't read it, but you know how to fear. It does that, he said, and then shook his head. It didn't used to. Does it stop? Eventually. What if it doesn't? He opened his mouth, then closed it. The men's hands were quiet on the table. The brown-eyed man looked at his cup with attention, which felt like a gesture of apology to me, and I wanted very badly to forgive him, and just as badly not to have to. The bell rang when nobody touched it. Outside, a fox crossed the lot, arrogant as a cat, its tail a question mark I knew the answer to. That night, after the convoy left, the bell rang again. A beat after the door had closed on nobody, it rang like memory. It rang again at 3. Frank stood on a chair and took it down, which was hard because the screw thread had rust in it. The bell lay on the counter like a tooth. He put it in the drawer with the pens that run out and only write if you shake them, and the seam moved a hair back as if it missed having the bell to play with. I stopped bringing my book. I stopped timing the flicker because it had grown unpredictable, and that felt like inviting the wrong kind of ideas. I found the coin again 2 mornings later when I was emptying garbages. It lay in the bottom of the kitchen can, gleaming under a soaked paper napkin someone had used to wipe something off a plate that hadn't been ordered. The nick across Washington's temple was deeper. The quarter was cold as if it had been in a freezer. I picked it up with a dish towel and held it to the light. It looked exactly like itself and nothing like itself at all. I thought about pockets, about what you carry because it gives you courage and how courage is just a story you loan yourself. I put the coin into my apron. I didn't tell Frank we have our private religions. I pressed my palm to the seam and I said a thing I would be ashamed to say aloud. I said, "Please do not want me." It did not answer, and that is its answer. The thing about hauntings is that they get ambitious. Or maybe it's us. Maybe we start to do half the work. At the end of my second week of nights, the nursing student Bree didn't come in for her break. At 3:30, a patrol car rolled past slow. I had a thought that sat like a stone in the mouth. The brown-eyed man had asked and I had answered, and maybe that's how it happens. Each of us a pin in the map, a string to be pulled later. I put my hand on the phone and thought about calling her. I thought about the napkin with the list of names under the sugar caddy and how names are invitations. At 2 a.m., the convoy came. The men sat. The seam glowed a little like it was warm. I poured. Lead didn't move. At the end, in the farthest seat, there was someone new. She was maybe my age. Her hair was a color nobody is born with, the red of a sign saying stop, but bad dye job, done at home with a splattered towel. She wore a coat that didn't fit. Her face was pale like theirs, but her eyes were all color and hurt. She looked at me as if I were a mirror she'd been told was a window. I felt something in my chest lean. She didn't speak. Lead didn't care. He doesn't have care or any of the other human coins. I set her cup down. My hand touched the table by accident. It was colder than thinking. Careful, Frank said, and I wanted to say, is there another word? I wanted to say, does careful mean love in a language I don't know? When they left, she left with them. That's what you say when you don't want to say they took her. She left with them, and the fog took up its beautiful post on the threshold like a guard who is also a thief. The bell did not ring. My coin burned in my pocket like a tiny stove. When the red of the eastern field bled up over the sorghum, and the birds began their scribble work at the margins, I went out into the lot and stood where the trucks always parked. Their tire marks were darker, as if the lot were a page and someone had traced the lines twice to make sure they would last. The day I decided I would quit happened like all decisive days, accidentally. I had my resignation in my head like a song. Thank you for the chance, nights aren't for me, family responsibilities. And I had my apron in my locker, folded for the last time. I told myself I would do my last pour perfectly and then walk out before the sun rose. I told myself I would not try to be remembered. I told myself a lot of good things. At 1:30, the fog came without humidity. dry as chalk dust, and that was wrong. At 1:50, the bell rang from the drawer where Frank had put it. He looked at me like he had stepped on a live wire. He opened the drawer. The bell sat nice as a bride. He closed the drawer. It rang again. You can live with a lot until the drawer rings. At 2, the door opened on nothing. The cold came in. The trucks didn't. The booth filled with men who were not there, and the chrome filled with what they were and what they were happy to be. Lead sat and folded his hands, and when I poured, he turned his head and looked me straight on for the first time since the first time. The eyes in the bone face were empty, which is supposed to be a relief and is not. The seam moved an inch. It touched the lip of the register. It breathed at my knuckles. If I'd pressed, it would have pressed back. "Frank," I said, because saying his name felt like throwing a rope. He put one heavy, warm hand over mine, and we held the handle of the coffee pot together, like parents teaching a child to write. "It will pass," he said. "Everything does, even us." He smiled with half his mouth. "Especially us." I poured the last cup of my last night. The coffee rode out in a dark curve. It did that thing liquids do when you pour them into a space that wants them. It made a little whisk of sound like agreement. I set the pot back and stepped away as if backward steps were a protective spell. In the chrome, she leaned forward. The girl who might have been me and might have been some other girl in 97 or 53 or yesterday's version of me. Her eyes were open and not kind. I saw my grin there too, not mean, not anything. Just the sort of grin you use to sign for a package. They sat 19 minutes. They stood. The door opened. The bell in the drawer rang. The trucks rolled past outside and did not turn in, and then turned in anyway on the other side of the seam. The world made a little switch, a toggled toy, something children do to test if you are watching. I untied my apron. I hung it up. I washed my hands, which is the last thing you do in a place you're leaving. I wrote a note, "Thank you for the chance." I took the coin out of my pocket and placed it on the counter where the seam looked dullest. I pressed until I felt the thinnest give and the most polite resistance. I left the feather where I had imagined it to be, even if it wasn't there anymore, which is how you keep a promise to yourself when the world won't let you keep it out loud. I went home. I slept. I dreamed of a road that takes the same curve forever. This is where the story should end if I wanted it to be kind. I could tell you I quit and I never went back, and the nights got their own babysitter and the bell stopped ringing in drawers. I could tell you I went to college 2 towns over and worked at a library circulation desk with soft pencils, and the only hauntings were overdue fines. I could tell you my mother's car got a new transmission, and her hands got rough in a way that meant money wasn't a problem anymore, and she smiled with both corners of her mouth again. All of that could be true. It would be a good ending. It would be a lie. But Frank called on Wednesday and said I could use a hand, and I said yes because I am me. He said, "It's easy, kid," and I said, "I know." He said, "Just the one pour." And I said, "I know." The phone clicked when he hung up, and I listened to the line hum like the fluorescent light over the booth. At 1:59, I tied the apron again. I stood at the counter, and the seam was a quiet vein. The bell was back on its bracket, new screws shining. The fog made its beautiful corpse drapery. The trucks came, and their headlights walked the glass. Lead sat, the others sat. The brown-eyed man sat with pale eyes. The girl with the red hair that nobody is born with sat at the end and did not look at me. I poured. 9 minutes in, the moth rang the bell in a hopeful way. 10 minutes in, the kitchen radio fizzed and caught a station from 2 states away that was playing a basketball game from a previous decade. At 19, they stood. I stood. Frank stood. The bell didn't ring. The men left. The door shut. The fog held its breath. Then, like a scene in a movie you hate because it looks like a cheap edit, Lead turned back. His head moved without his shoulders. It was slow, a grade-pulled crawl. He looked at the counter, not at me. His hand lifted an inch and then set down again. Somewhere a truck downshifted that wasn't there. I went to wipe the booth and found a napkin under the sugar caddy that shouldn't have been there. People don't leave things, not these people. The napkin had a crease in it so exact it seemed drawn. In pencil, written neat like a student who is still trying to impress, there was a list of names. At the bottom, after a space, there was my name. It was spelled right, which means someone asked. Next to it, in smaller letters, there was the word midnight. It isn't when they come. It isn't when we pour. It is when you learn whether you're staying. I put the napkin back and pressed the sugar caddy onto it so the world could choose for me if it had the urge. I walked to the counter. I put the quarter with the deepened nick on the register, and I told the seam what I would not tell anyone with a mouth. I said, I'll be here. Not always, not forever, but enough. So now when 2 a.m. comes and the convoy makes its precise turns and the pale men sit like ideas, there is a girl in the reflection behind the counter who leans in a little too far, and her smile is not kind, but it is honest, and her hand is bones, and her bones are beautiful. She is careful. She is particular. She pours and she steps back and she lets them be. Sometimes a person at the end looks up with brown eyes and asks one small please, and sometimes I answer, and every time I do, the seam shivers and the fog thins and the bell rings once, like a secret getting told. I lay awake hearing the hum of the diner light, a ghost of electricity that knew my name. By morning I almost called to quit, and by afternoon I was counting filters and wiping the chrome, careful as prayer. Some routines are doors you mistake for walls. The list on the napkin stays tucked under the sugar and I don't touch it, but I know it's there the way you know where your scars sleep. If you pass our exit and the fog presses low, you'll see neon and think of coffee. If you stop, I'll pour, and in the counter you'll glimpse the girl who stayed. She looks like me. Stay.